When I stepped into the middle of my own birthday party, the chatter and the clinking glasses went silent like someone had just pulled all the air out of the room. Every eye turned to me, a 71-year-old woman with a black eye that no makeup could hide. And then, in the hush of the crowd, my son spoke up, clear and proud like he'd just declared a victory. "My wife simply taught my mother how to respect other people." A thin laugh followed. My daughter-in-law stood beside him, her eyes cold as steel. I didn't cry. I just pressed a cold compress to my eye and looked straight at the ceiling camera I'd quietly installed last week. I smiled, because I knew tonight every one of their lies was being recorded second by second. And when that door opens, the last person they expect will walk in with an envelope that will make this room fall silent a second time. If you're still listening, tell me where you're watching from. Every comment you leave is another mark in this journey. And if this story has touched you, don't forget to hit like so it can reach even further. My name is Janice Middleton, 71, widowed for 3 years. I've lived in this house for more than half a century, where Theodore, my husband, and I raised our only son, Caleb. I'm not as wealthy as people think, but I have what Theo and I worked our whole lives to keep: a home, a decent past, and a small measure of self-respect left. I used to think old age would be peaceful tea in the morning, watering flowers in the afternoon, looking through old photos at night. Turns out, what I had to learn at 71 was how to protect myself from the very person I gave birth to. Tonight, in this very house, I'm no longer the gentle mother or the frail widow. I'm the only one who still remembers that justice sometimes arrives late, but it arrives. The living room of Middleton House glowed with warm golden light. A jazz track hung half-finished in the air. This room used to be where my late husband, Theodore Middleton, and I hosted family nights with apple pie and lavender on the table. Now, in this same room, all I could hear was my own slow heartbeat and the whispering, guests trying to make sense of what had just happened. The emerald dress I chose for the evening suddenly felt somber under the lights. I saw a few of my husband's old friends glance away. A few neighbors looked down, unsure. A younger guest let out a quiet sigh. I knew what they were thinking. What's wrong with her? The question sat on their lips, though no one dared speak it. Riley took a step forward and grabbed Caleb's hand like she was staking a claim. Her voice was smooth, scripted. "I just want your mother to understand she can't treat this house like it's hers alone. Your son has a family now." I kept my eyes steady. I didn't answer. I looked up at the corner of the ceiling, where a coin-sized camera turned slightly. Its tiny LED blinked like the eye of a loyal friend, waiting for my signal. No one knew that just 20 minutes earlier, I'd been upstairs with a compact powder in hand, about to touch up my makeup. Riley had walked in without knocking and calmly rifled through my jewelry box. When I said, "Don't touch my things," she smirked and shoved my shoulder as I stepped in. The fall slammed my head against the dresser edge, a stabbing pain tearing across my forehead. When I looked up, she was just standing there, coolly adjusting the silver bracelet on her wrist like nothing had happened. "You should be more careful, Janice. At your age, one slip can mean a broken bone." I said nothing. I wiped the blood from a small cut, looked in the mirror, my face swollen and crooked, but the light still in my eyes. I knew that if I stayed quiet tonight, tomorrow they'd call me confused and try to ship me off to a nursing home. I walked downstairs slowly. My heels hit each step in a steady rhythm, enough to make everyone turn. And then the shock, the one Riley never thought I'd have the nerve to deliver, was right there in front of them all. Me, with a black eye, chin up, wearing a cold smile. Caleb stood in the center of the room, gripping a whiskey glass. The son I once believed would protect his mother now looked at me like I was a troublesome stranger. "Mom, everyone's here. Please don't make a scene." His tone softened, but his eyes were full of annoyance. "I just want you to rest." Riley didn't mean it. You slipped, that's all. I almost laughed. Slipped, the word floated out of his mouth like it hadn't just torn someone's heart. An older guest, a friend of my husband, set his glass down and said quietly, "Caleb, you should take your mother to get checked." Riley turned and gave a cool smile. "No need, she's fine. My mother-in-law is very strong." I watched a few people quietly leave, not wanting to be pulled into the embarrassment. What remained was thick, heavy silence. I pressed the cold compress to my eye, pulled my phone from my pocket, and swiped. The security system's cloud backup kicked in. A tiny icon lit up. Uploading. I exhaled slowly. Anyone watching would assume I was calming myself, but inside, I'd started the countdown. In the corner, I saw my brother, Martin Cole, push through the crowd. Martin, once a Navy officer, 10 years older than me, still walked straight, with eyes sharp as steel. He took my hand, his voice low and steady. "You all right, Janice?" I nodded. "All right." He tilted his head, lowered his voice so only I could hear. "Don't give an inch. I already called Nora. She's on her way." I pressed my lips together. Just 2 days ago, I'd met with attorney Nora Park, an old friend of Theo's. She'd told me to back up every document in case of any forced transfer. I didn't think I'd need it this soon. In a room full of people, I stood still, looking at the two I used to call family. Riley clung to Caleb's arm, pretending to be caring, but her grip was so tight, her knuckles whitened. Caleb avoided my eyes, staring only at the bruise as if it proved the trouble of an old mother. A cold drop slid down my cheek, maybe from the compress, maybe a tear. I remembered what Theo used to say, "Janice, some battles don't need shouting. You just stand firm until the other side collapses." So I stood firm. A whisper rose behind me. Someone said, "Poor thing." Someone else said she should make room for her son. I heard it all, but I didn't react. Because I knew in a few minutes, every one of those mouths would go quiet. Riley stepped closer, the fake smile back on her face. "Mom, let me take you upstairs. Everyone's having a good time, you shouldn't ruin the mood." I looked at her and said slowly, "No, Riley. This is my house. I'm staying right here." A soft murmur rippled through the crowd. Caleb flushed and looked away. Outside, through the big window, I saw headlights sweep across the entry. An engine shut off, heels clicked on the stone path. The doorbell rang, a light sound, but sharp as a blade cutting the air. Riley squeezed Caleb's hand and whispered, "Who's showing up now?" I set my water glass down, adjusted the compress on my eye, and smiled for the first time all night. Small, tired, but calm. I knew exactly who was out there. And when the door opened with a red-sealed envelope in Nora Park's hand, my 71st birthday finally began. 3 years ago, I still said we. Now there's only I. That winter morning, sunlight slipped through the curtains, thin as paper. Theodore Middleton, the man who walked with me through nearly half a lifetime, lay beside me, peaceful like he was sleeping. I touched his shoulder and whispered, "Theo?" And the world, from that moment, went silent. No heartbeat, no breath, only the space between my fingers and his skin, cooling by the second. They say when a partner dies after so many years together, the house changes too. It keeps its shape, but the warmth is gone. Middleton House, the 2-story home we bought when Caleb was in 2nd grade, suddenly felt frighteningly large. I still remember every brick he laid by hand, every squeaky hinge he hadn't gotten around to fixing. Out back, the row of dark crimson roses Theo planted, the kind he said outlasts people, stood proud even in the frozen winter. The day he died, Caleb sat with me, holding my hand. He was just past 40, fatherless, and I had lost both my partner and my anchor. At the funeral, he promised, "I'll take care of you. You won't have to worry about anything." I believed him. I wanted to believe him, because in his eyes I saw Theo's younger look, honest, steady, responsible. A few weeks later, attorney Nora Park came by with a thick folder tied with a gray ribbon. Her voice was gentle but firm. Mr. Middleton prepared everything. Inside was the will. Theo left full ownership of Middleton House to me, no intermediaries, no sharing. At the end was a special clause, carefully typed, "In any circumstance where Mrs. Janice Middleton is forced, coerced, or manipulated to leave her home, the entire property shall not pass to any relatives but be transferred to the state's Elder Protection Fund." I read that part 3 times. My hands shaking so much I had to set my water down. Nora said Theo had come to see her just a month before he passed. He told her, "Janice is too kind. Someone could take advantage of her trust." I cried the whole afternoon, not because of money, but because, even to his last breath, he was thinking of me. That night, I sat on the back porch, moonlight on the roses. I heard his voice on the wind. "Don't let anyone use family ties to push you out of your own home." I didn't know why he said that. Back then, Caleb was still the devoted son calling me every morning, cooking weekend dinners, fixing leaky faucets without being asked. Maybe Theo sensed what I couldn't, that sometimes the danger doesn't come from a stranger knocking, but from the person who already has the key. In those first months after the funeral, Caleb moved back in. The house had a voice again. Every morning I made coffee. He read the paper and asked casually, "Did you sleep okay?" In the afternoons, he cut the grass, then ate dinner with me. We talked about Theo trips we took, the paint smell he liked, how he refused to buy pre-sliced bread. I thought the loss would soften. I kept my habit of journaling, the one Theo used to tease as the accountant's need for control. But my journals weren't just dates and thoughts. I saved receipts, invoices, copies of letters. I didn't know why I was so careful. Maybe as we get older, we need little slips of paper to prove we're still living, still in charge of something. Each morning after Caleb left for work, I cleaned, tended the plants, and dusted the wedding photo on the wall. Sometimes I touched the glass and told the man in the picture, "Don't worry, I'm okay." Truth was, I never truly felt okay. Without Theo, everything echoed. Wind down the hallway sounded like a sigh. The big kitchen held one plate, one teacup. I turned the TV on just to have a voice in the room. To keep from feeling lonely, I learned a few new things. I installed the smart lock Caleb gave me for Christmas, even though it took an entire afternoon to get it working. I downloaded the security camera app and synced it to my phone just to peek at the backyard when it rained. They were small things, but for me, they kept me busy, useful, above the silence. Back then, Caleb was sweet. He said, "Don't worry about the tech, Mom. I set it up. You just press one button." I nodded and smiled. He didn't know I had already taught myself to reset all the passwords and create a separate backup. It wasn't that I didn't trust my son. I just wanted one corner of safety that was mine, just in case. Every time I looked at Theo's paperwork, I remembered his words. He said, "A will isn't just paperwork. It's the invisible fence I'm building around you." Back then, it sounded like too much. Now I understand those invisible fences might be the only thing holding me steady against storms stirred up by my own family. That spring, Caleb got a promotion at the construction firm. I was happy. He bought new rose bushes for the yard, said they were for Dad. They bloomed late deep red and strangely fragrant. I thought things would get better, that we'd keep this house together, like a piece of Theo. But in that calm, I sometimes felt something off. Caleb was home less, took secretive calls, and said curtly, "Just work stuff." I didn't ask. He was entitled to privacy. I still trusted him. I trusted him until I saw how his eyes shifted whenever he mentioned Riley Sloan, the smart colleague he brought up more than anyone else. I didn't yet know Riley would become the storm that stripped my home bare. I only knew that behind Theo's warnings, fate seemed to be patiently waiting for its test. One windy night, I opened my journal and wrote the last line of the day. Maybe you saw something coming. I'll try to be strong, Theo. I promise if anyone tries to take this house, they'll have to go through me first. Then I turned off the light and lay in the dark, listening to the smart lock click shut, a dry sound that, strangely, comforted me. I had no idea that 3 years later, those small things, journals, cameras, locks, would be the shield that saved me from the cruelest betrayal. That night before sleep, I stared at the ceiling where moonlight poured through the window. I thought of Theo, his summers mowing the yard, his hands stained with soil when he planted the first row of dark crimson roses. I smiled and whispered, "I'm still holding our fortress, Theo." I didn't know that promise would start a fight I never imagined I'd have to wage at 71. Caleb met Riley Sloan at a construction conference in Chicago. I remember he called that day, oddly excited, saying he'd met an amazing woman, gets the work, has taste, and is really sharp. I laughed and said, "You sound like the way your father first described me." He laughed, and I thought it was just a cute moment. I didn't know that woman would change everything in my life, from how people spoke to me to what home would mean. A few weeks later, Caleb brought Riley over. She walked into Middleton House like she already knew every brick. Cream blazer, brown hair tied back, heels tapping a confident rhythm across the hardwood. Riley hugged me, her expensive perfume flooding my nose so strong and sweet it was almost unpleasant. "Mrs. Middleton, I'm so glad to finally meet the woman Caleb always talks about," she said, smile bright as a camera flash. I answered politely, "Just call me Janice. Everyone does." "Janice," she repeated, dragging out the last sound like she was tasting my name. Her focused eyes, though smiling, didn't stay on my face. They skimmed the painting on the wall, the display cabinet, Theo's antique clock, everything, in under 10 seconds. I'm used to admiring looks, but Riley's wasn't admiration. It was appraisal. That night I made a careful dinner. Herb roasted chicken, Caleb's childhood favorite, arugula salad with fresh cheese, and warm bread. I wanted the first meeting to feel welcoming, the way I always greeted family. Riley praised the smell like an Italian restaurant, but ate only a few bites. She set down her knife and tilted her head with a smile. "Tastes great, it's just, I'm doing low carb. Your kitchen seems a little coated in old oil smells, doesn't it?" I paused. No one had ever said that in this kitchen, but I smiled and said, "Maybe the oven's old, I'll clean it again." She nodded, her eyes still on the oak tabletop where I could see quiet calculations. After dinner, Riley stood and strolled around. "The living room. This house has amazing potential," she said, like pitching a client. "If we brighten the curtains, swap the rug, add a few modern planters, the value will jump. Who knows, if you ever need to sell later, you'll cash out big," I answered softly. "I've never thought about selling." Riley turned back, still smiling. "Oh, of course. But sometimes you can't predict the future, right?" Caleb was clearing plates and chimed in, "Riley's just helping you think ahead, Mom. She's a planner. She notices details people miss." I nodded, though something felt off, like a thread pulled tight somewhere in my chest. After that, Riley showed up more often. Weekends with wine or fresh flowers. On the surface, perfect. She spoke smoothly, knew when to compliment, when to laugh. But in her eyes, I always saw a quiet equation, like someone arranging a chessboard I hadn't realized I was standing on. Whenever she passed through the living room, she touched the chair arms, the table, the family frames. "You and Mr. Middleton kept everything so well," she said. "But this style, it's a bit too traditional. If you update, it'll feel brighter and more open." I just smiled, not wanting a debate. I've learned that an older person's silence is often mistaken for weakness, but sometimes it's a way to observe. Caleb seemed captivated by Riley. He often praised how independent, sharp, and considerate she was. Each time, I heard Theo's voice in memory. Be careful with people who make your son change how he talks about his own family. One June evening, Caleb brought Riley to announce their engagement. It all happened so fast I didn't have time to think. Are you sure? I asked. Sure, Mom. I've never met anyone who gets me like Riley. I looked at Riley. She smiled and took my son's hand. Your son is wonderful, Janice. I promise I'll always take care of him. I nodded. Something heavy sat in my chest, nameless. Their wedding was small, just a few dozen guests. Riley organized everything herself, saying I should just sit back and enjoy. I thought that meant respect, until I looked closer. Everything at the wedding carried Riley's style. Cold whites, orchids, shiny metal chairs. Nothing of Caleb, nothing of the Middleton family. After the wedding, I thought they'd get their own place, but then Caleb said, "We'll stay with you for a bit, until we find the right house." I agreed. Even if I felt a twinge of worry, I wanted to believe. What mother doesn't want a little more time with her child? Stay for a bit, stretched without end. In less than a month, Riley's decor took over. Gray velvet pillows, glass vases, a modern silver rug. The house should feel fresher, she said. Old colors make people sluggish. I smiled and said, as long as Caleb likes it. But within weeks I realized staying for a bit wasn't the right phrase. Riley started setting rules. She swapped the cream curtains for icy white to reflect light better. She moved Theo's small memorial shelf to another corner because it threw off the living room's balance. She hung her and Caleb's wedding photo in the center of the room, where Theo's smiling garden portrait used to be. I didn't argue, but every time I walked through, I felt cold. A house once full of sunlight now glared harsh, sterile, emotionless like her gaze. Riley talked a lot about minimalism, function, and increasing property value. One afternoon she asked, "Do you know homes around here are skyrocketing? If you sell now, you'll double your money for sure." I answered plainly, "I'm not selling." She smiled, softer. "Of course, no need to sell now. It's just, maybe one day you'd want somewhere quieter. Seniors often prefer communities with care and friends their age. I know some lovely places with a lake and yoga rooms." I set my teacup down and looked her in the eye. "Thanks, but I'm fine here." She went quiet, but I saw a faint smile like someone laying the first brick of a long plan. That night, Caleb came home late. When I told him what Riley had said, he just laughed. "She's only looking out for you. I think she really wants you to be comfortable." I went silent. Since when did Riley's words carry more weight than his mother's? I went upstairs and stood at the window, looking out at the rose garden. Theo's dark crimson roses were in their best bloom, heartbreakingly beautiful. But as the breeze passed, the petals fell, tapping the steps one by one, like a reminder, everything gets replaced if you don't hold it fast. I closed the window, sat down at my desk, and opened my old journal. That day's entry: Riley walked into my house in high heels and syrupy compliments. But in that smile, I heard measuring like a hammer tapping walls to find the weakest spot to strike. I don't know when my life started to change course. I only know that from the day Riley crossed Middleton House's threshold, my peace left with Theo's warmth. From the day she came in, Middleton House stopped being a home and became a stage she directed. Caleb played the perfect husband, and I was a dated prop pushed out of frame. The parties began. First, intimate dinners with Caleb's coworkers, then Riley's college group weekends. Then birthdays, anniversaries, yoga meetups, Sunday brunches, week after week. A house once quiet and smelling of Theo's apple pie now thumped with electronic music and reeked of wine and heavy perfume so strong I had to shut my bedroom door. I often asked gently, "Riley, could you let me know a few days ahead so I can prep the kitchen?" She smiled and answered breezily, "Oh, you don't need to worry. These are young people parties. You just rest. Relax." "Okay." I nodded, but I understood that in Riley's dictionary, rest meant stay away. One August evening, I went down for water and found Riley at the doorway, blocking me with a polite smile. "Mrs. Janice, guests are using the karaoke downstairs. It's loud. Maybe turn in early?" Her voice was sweet, but her eyes were hard as glass. I turned back upstairs without a word. As my door closed, I heard her call down. She finally got the message. She finally got the message. I didn't turn on the light. I just sat there in the dark, listening to the music below, the laughter, the clink of glasses, the heels on hardwood, each sound designed, it seemed, to remind me I no longer belonged here. From that day, new rules started appearing. Riley taped a note on the fridge. "Please do not use the washing machine after 7 p.m. to avoid disturbing the neighbors." Then came, "Keep the living room at 70 degrees Fahrenheit. The AC can't handle anything higher." And finally, "If you use the kitchen, clean it right after you cook." 3 notes, 3 signatures at the bottom. Riley. "No, Mom. No, Janice. Just orders." I let out a bitter laugh. Back then, Theo used to stick notes on the fridge for me, also 3. "Remember breakfast. Don't forget your meds. I love you." Now, that spot holds only cold slips of paper like a dorm rule board. The physical changes crept in quietly but relentlessly. The cream curtains. Theo chose sun-washed yellow that kept the room warm even in winter, were replaced with minimalist gray ones, pulled shut all day like they were afraid of letting light in. The hand-woven rug from my mother disappeared too, swapped for a cold, industrial carpet with no scent and no soul. Riley called it modern minimalism. I called it erasing the past. Even the oak dining table where Theo used to read the Sunday paper was pushed into the garage. In its place stood a glass table with shiny steel legs. She said, "Young people don't like old furniture. It feels heavy." I was going to say that old things are what give a house its memories, but I stayed quiet, because for some people, memories are just clutter. One late night, I overheard a conversation I'll never forget. I was heading down for water, stepping softly so I wouldn't wake anyone. But Riley's voice floated from the living room low and even, like a knife sliding across a tabletop. "This house is too big for 3 people. I think Mom should move into Silver Oaks. It's clean, comfortable, with nurses on staff. She'll be happier there than here." Caleb's voice came, soft. "I don't know. Mom's never lived away from home." "I know, but you have to be realistic. We need our own space. This is the time to start a young family's life." I heard the emphasis on young family. Then, a stretch of silence. After that, Riley again, quiet but clear. "You don't want our kid growing up in a house full of old stuff and shadows of the past, right?" I stood in the dark, gripping the glass so hard it nearly cracked. Caleb didn't object. He just said, low and sad, "Maybe I'll talk to Mom later." In that moment, I didn't just hear sadness. I heard a small seed of greed sprouting in my son's voice. After that, I started retreating from my own home. I cooked less, mostly bread or soup. I stopped turning on the TV at night. I stopped walking around the house partly to avoid bumping into Riley's guests, partly because I was tired of hearing her call me Janice flatly in front of others. First it was Mom, then Mrs. Middleton, and now just Janice. From her mouth, that name carried no respect, only sweet contempt. Once, at dinner, in front of their friends, Riley smiled and said, "Janice is a bit particular, but she has a good heart." The whole table laughed. I set my knife down, kept a small smile, then excused myself to go upstairs. On the way up, I heard Riley murmur, "See? Told you. If you're gentle, she'll listen." I closed my bedroom door, leaned against the wood, and for the first time in years, I felt truly invisible. The upstairs bedroom became my entire world. I kept a teapot ready, a few old books, a small lamp on the desk. Every morning I opened the window to look at the rose garden Theo planted. The flowers still bloomed and swayed in the wind, as if nothing outside had changed. But inside me, something was closing bit by bit. I started documenting more carefully, not just a journal records. I wrote down everything Riley changed, the day she swapped the curtains, the day she taped the note on the fridge, the first day she called me Janice. I wrote down that late-night conversation word for word, every Silver Oaks, every our own space. Not for revenge, but because I knew there would come a time I'd need proof to remind someone that I was still clear-minded. Caleb spoke less, and met my eyes even less. I didn't blame him. Someone caught between his wife and his mother sometimes stays quiet out of cowardice, sometimes out of fear. I don't know which one my son was. But I knew that each time I looked at him, my heart clenched because in his eyes, love was slowly turning into obligation. One night, after the music downstairs finally stopped, I sat at my desk, switched on the small lamp, and opened the old leather notebook. That day's page read, "They don't know I spent a lifetime protecting this home from storms, debt, and bitter winters. But the worst storm didn't come from outside. It came from the very person I once held in my arms." I closed the notebook, stood, and looked at Theo's photo on the wall. In the frame, he still smiled, a rose stem in his hand. I told him softly, "I still remember what you said. I won't let anyone push me out." Moonlight spilled into the room, touching the edge of the desk and reflecting off the frame. I saw myself. There, a small figure, silver hair, but bright eyes. I knew the fight hadn't begun, but I was ready. I was no longer the gentle mother shoved into the shadows. I was the woman who would prove that when an elderly woman is treated as invisible, that's when she becomes most dangerous. My 71st birthday arrived quietly. I hadn't planned a party, just wanted to brew some tea, set Theo's freshly cut roses on the table, and sit under the porch to watch the sun. But Riley said, "You have to let me do it. A proper party will show everyone you're still healthy and elegant." I didn't argue. I was tired of small fights. What I learned after 70 years is this: sometimes silence is stronger than a reaction. I just didn't know that night the proper Riley talked about was really a trap wrapped in lights and flowers. That morning, while I was arranging gifts for the guests, Riley walked into my room. Silk blouse, hair in a high bun, perfume sharp as a blade. Her voice was cold, hard, so precise I thought she'd practiced every word. "Today you should decide your future." I looked up, thinking she'd misspoken. "My future? What do you mean?" She met my eyes without a flicker. "We need this house. It's time for you to move somewhere more suitable. Silver Oaks has a room available I already checked. You'll have care and friends your age." My hands started to shake. I slowly set my teacup down, afraid a slip would make the whole room hear the shattering of trust. "You want to throw me out of my home?" Riley gave a small laugh. "Don't make it sound so harsh. I just want things clear so everyone can be comfortable." On the table lay a stack of papers. I knew what it was before she said a word. "Just a small formality sign to transfer the title so later Caleb and I won't have to worry. I'll make sure you have the best nursing home. Money's not an issue." I shook my head. "I'm not signing." My voice was so steady it surprised even me. Riley stared at me, the smile thinning, a flash of irritation in her eyes. "If you won't sign, I can't guarantee Caleb will stay patient. He's under a lot of stress." The words dropped into the room like a stone. I stood, keeping my voice from shaking. "Don't use my son's name to threaten me." She shrugged, gathered the papers, and said icily, "Then have a very memorable birthday." When she left, I sat down, opened the drawer, and took out the camera drive to check. Every file of activity in the house, dates, images, audio, everything intact. I saved another copy to the cloud, changed the password, and put it back in the wardrobe. I don't know when the shaking began. Maybe when I realized the thing Theo feared was actually happening. They didn't see me as a mother anymore. I was just an obstacle between them and this house. In the afternoon, while I was trying to fix my makeup, the door burst open. Riley again. No knock. No permission. In her hand was my jewelry box, the dark wooden one Theo gave me on our 10th anniversary. I heard the lock click, the clink of bracelets and earrings. "What are you doing with my things?" She didn't look up, just said, "Picking a necklace to match your dress." I stepped closer and yanked the box from her hand. "No one touches my keepsakes." A spark flashed in her eyes, then shifted into a smile. "You should calm down. You're making people think you can't control your emotions." Before I could answer, she shoved my shoulder. It happened in a second. My back slammed into the dresser edge. My head hit the wood. A sharp pain shot across my temple. The world spun. When I opened my eyes, Riley was adjusting her bracelet, looking at me like nothing had happened. "You should be more careful, Janice. At your age, even a small fall is dangerous." When I hit the floor, I didn't just lose my balance, I lost my faith in family. If you were me in that moment, what would you do? Stay silent or stand up for justice? "Tell me what you honestly think. I want to hear your answer." Then she left the room, and I sat on the floor, head buzzing, heart pounding. I didn't cry. I pressed a cold cloth to the swelling and looked in the mirror. My left eye was turning black and blue. I took a deep breath, picked up my foundation, and tried to cover it. Through the streaks of powder and tears, I saw my face older but not weaker. I changed into the emerald dress. Theo once said, "Makes you look like spring in a winter room." It used to be the color of hope. Now it was the color of calm and preparation. Downstairs, the music started. I smelled wine, lavender, candles. Riley had invited more people than I imagined, Caleb's co-workers, her friends, neighbors, even a few I'd only met once at Theo's funeral. Everything gleamed silver from the backdrop and balloons to the cake. On the gift table, a card read, "Happy 71st, Janice, to new beginnings." I walked down the stairs, one step at a time. Conversation stopped, then the murmurs began. Some people looked at me, others avoided my eyes. Riley rushed over, voice sweet. "Mom, why aren't you resting? You should be upstairs." I looked at her, then at Caleb, standing with a champagne flute. "Why? This is my house." The air froze. A guest gave an awkward chuckle and raised a glass. Caleb lowered his voice. "Mom, don't make a scene. Riley's just worried about you." I spoke slowly, loud enough for everyone to hear. "She's not worried about me. She wants me out of the house." A soft "oh" rippled through the room. Riley smiled, but her lips trembled. "Listen, everyone. What is Mom even saying? You're misunderstanding me." Caleb set his glass down and gripped my shoulder, voice hard. "Please stop. This is your birthday. I don't want to fight in front of our friends." I looked at my only son and saw only embarrassment in his eyes, not concern. Martin, my older brother, had been quiet nearby. When Caleb finished, he stepped forward, voice low and sharp. "What did you just say to your mother, Caleb?" "I just want to protect your wife by humiliating the woman who gave you life?" He turned to Riley. "You hit my sister, didn't you?" Riley scoffed. "I don't know what you're talking about." Martin pointed at the bruise on my face, voice rising. She fell on her own, huh?" The room buzzed. Someone whispered, "Mrs. Janice seems fine to me." Another answered, "What kind of daughter-in-law talks like that?" Caleb turned to Martin. "You don't understand." "This is a family matter," Martin barked, loud enough to fill the room. "Family? If your father were alive, he'd be ashamed of how you treat your mother." The air grew so heavy it was hard to breathe. Riley forced a tight smile. Caleb looked down, cheeks flushed. I stood still, cold cloth to my eye, feeling my heartbeat slow. I wasn't shaking anymore, because I knew in this moment I wasn't alone. Then the doorbell rang. Soft, but in the taut air, it sounded like a verdict. Riley squeezed Caleb's hand and whispered, "Who's coming now?" I smiled, the one I'd been preparing all day. Probably someone bringing a special birthday gift for me. The door opened. Nora Park walked in, calm, a red-sealed envelope in her hand. She nodded to the guests, eyes on me. "Sorry I'm late, Mrs. Middleton. I have a few things to announce right here, in front of everyone." The room went dead quiet. Riley gripped Caleb's hand, face pale. And I stood tall, adjusted my dress, and for the first time that night, I could breathe. On my 71st birthday, they thought I was just a frail old woman backed into a corner. But in a few minutes, they would learn that the person they tried to erase from this house was the one who wrote its rules. When Nora began to speak, the room seemed to hold its breath. I stood in, the window's light, warm gold behind me. Riley's fingers trembled where they clutched Caleb's hand, though she tried to look composed. Martin stood at my side, eyes stern, shoulder angled forward like a wall, ready to block any blow. Nora opened the red envelope and pulled out papers stamped with the court seal. Her voice was even and clear, each word landing like a gavel strike. Under Clause 14 of Mr. Theodore Middleton's will, this house is under the full ownership of Mrs. Janice Middleton. However, there is a special provision, commonly referred to as a protective inheritance reversal clause. She looked up, gaze sweeping the room. It means that if the current inheritor misses, Janice is forced, coerced, or pressured to sell, transfer, or vacate this property, then ownership will not pass to any family member. Instead, it will go directly to the Hartwell Veterans Retirement Fund, a nonprofit Mr. Middleton supported during his lifetime. A wave of murmurs rose. Someone muttered, "So if they push her out, they lose everything?" Riley turned pale, lips trembling. Caleb looked at me like, for the first time, he could hear his father's voice from the grave. Nora went on, calm but edged with legal steel. "Mr. Middleton wrote, if there is any act of coercion toward my wife, the asset shall be immediately removed from the family line. No exceptions." She paused, then added softly, "Therefore, if tonight there is any evidence that Mrs. Middleton was forced to leave this home or subjected to violence or threats, this property will immediately belong to the Hartwell Fund, bypassing Caleb Middleton." I looked at Riley. She swallowed hard, fingers digging into Caleb's wrist until her knuckles whitened. Caleb slid his arm away without meeting her eyes. The room shifted. The music was off. The guests who'd only come to celebrate were silent now. A woman near the door sighed. Mr. Theodore really planned ahead. Riley gave a strained smile, trying to steady her voice. "I don't understand. Why read a dead man's will at a birthday party? That's disrespectful." Nora didn't answer. She opened her briefcase, pulled a slim file, and flipped to the first page. "Because 3 weeks ago, you, Riley Sloan Middleton, hired an appraisal firm in Franklin County to assess this house." She held up the document for all to see, the company logo and Riley's signature. The invoice states you paid, with an email request for an estimated value after the owner vacates. Riley stepped forward, voice pitched high. "I was just curious. I only wanted to know what our family's asset is worth, that's all." Nora's expression didn't change. "Really? Then what about this email to a law office the following week?" She pulled out a color print and read, crisp and clear. "If an elderly person shows signs of confusion or obstructs family assets, what is the legal process to declare them incompetent? Sender, rsloan@.com." A few guests gaped. Caleb shut his eyes, drew a deep breath, fists clenched. I felt my heartbeat slow. I said nothing. I just looked at Riley, and let her sink under the rising tide of whispers. She stepped back half a pace, lips working. I was only asking. I didn't. Martin cut in, voice like thunder. Nobody just asks that unless they mean to do it. Nora nodded at me. I understood. It was time to show everything. I pulled out my phone and opened the security camera app. The screen lit Riley's face. 1 second, 2, and the video played. Me in my bedroom, Riley at my jewelry box. Everything clear to the last detail. Audio filled the room. What are you doing with my things? Picking a necklace to match your dress. No one touches my keepsakes. You're making people think you can't control your emotions. Then the shove. Clear as day. I fell. My head hit the dresser edge. The dry thud made the whole room flinch. A few guests covered their mouths. Others backed away. A middle-aged man blurted, "My God, she clearly pushed her." A woman turned on Caleb, furious. "You stood there and let your wife do that?" Riley went white but forced a shaky smile. "No, she slipped. She just lost her balance." Nora paused the video, then replayed the moment right after the fall where Riley's voice was flat and cold. "You should be more careful, Janice. At your age, even a small fall is dangerous." The room went stone silent. Nora looked straight at Riley, her voice lowered but carrying. "That's not how a daughter-in-law talks to a mother-in-law. That's a threat." I heard Martin exhale, then murmur to me, like it was just for us. "You did the right thing by not staying silent." Caleb stood in the middle, blood drained from his face. He looked at me, then at Riley. His mouth opened, but no sound came. Riley clutched his arm, pleading, "Honey, I swear I didn't mean." "Things it. I only wanted to keep Mom safe. I never meant to hurt her." No one believed her. The guests watched her like a clumsy actress forgetting her lines. An older woman, Theo's friend, stepped forward, voice shaky but firm. "I've seen this before. It's called emotional and physical domestic abuse. No shouting needed, just one shove and a few lies are enough." Many nodded. Someone whispered, "Mrs. Janice deserves protection." Riley snapped at Nora. "You have no right to read all this here. This is a private matter." Nora replied evenly, "Not private anymore, Miss Sloan. When there's evidence of abuse, the law has a say." She closed the file and turned to Caleb. "I advise you to have her leave this house tonight. If not, I'll file a report with the court in the morning." Riley backed away, eyes wet but tears nowhere to be found. She looked to Martin like he might defend her, but he only folded his arms and said coldly, "She's not taking one more step up those stairs." All eyes followed Riley as she spun in place under the stairs. Her voice broke. I only wanted to build this family." Nora cut in. "Families aren't built on lies and coercion, miss." "Riley, they're built on respect, something you never showed your mother-in-law." Riley looked around, frantic, then turned to Caleb, the last branch within reach. "Say something. Please." Caleb stared at her, lips trembling, voice so small I had to strain to hear. "I don't know anymore." I had never seen my son like that, standing between two worlds, both collapsing. On one side, the wife he once trusted. On the other, the mother he forgot to protect. Now everything lay bare before everyone, with nowhere left to hide. Riley burst into real tears, high, shrill, sobbing. But no one came near. No one offered comfort. Guests began slipping out of the room, quietly, like people leaving a courtroom after the verdict has been read. Martin still blocked the stairs. Nora slid the files back into her briefcase, then said softly, "Mrs. Middleton, you can rest easy. No one is going to push you out of this house anymore." I looked around the room, still glittered with silver. The ribbons Riley had hung were there, but everything felt cold and hollow. Riley stood there, makeup smeared, eyes desperate. Caleb lowered his head, as if he had just realized he'd lost something he could never get back. My 71st birthday didn't end with congratulations, it ended with the silence of a sentence just handed down. And in the middle of a house once built on love, those two young people, one fell from the peak of arrogance, and the other fell into a pit of guilt. Riley froze at the door, hair in disarray, mascara streaked like ash. When Nora motioned for her to leave, Riley suddenly whipped around, screeching like someone unhinged. "I'm Caleb's wife! I have a right to be here. I have a right to this house." The whole room went dead silent. Caleb stood just a few steps away, head bowed, arms hanging at his sides. Nora answered calmly, her voice light but cold enough to bite. "Your rights, Mrs. Middleton, do not include taking, coercing, or using violence against someone." She paused a beat, then enunciated each word, "especially not against an elderly mother in her own home." Riley opened her mouth to argue, but Martin's stare stopped her short. He stood at the foot of the stairs, broad-shouldered, steady as a wall. The light hit his face hard and resolute. She backed away, heels clacking on the wood floor. Each step sounded like a hammer, sealing shut the pretense of this proper birthday party. When the door closed behind Riley, the house fell quiet again, a heavy silence, but a clean one. Nora gathered her files and set them on the table. "Things are stable for now, but I suggest changing the locks tonight, and if they come back, call me or the police." I nodded, my voice hoarse. "Thank you, Nora. Without you, I would have lost everything." She smiled. "No, Mrs. Janice. A woman like you isn't easily stripped of anything." When everyone left, only 3 of us remained, me, Martin, and Caleb. The living room lights were still on, but that light wasn't warm anymore. It shone straight on my only son's face, the face that once made me believe my love could redeem any mistake. Caleb stepped closer and spoke softly. "Mom, I'm sorry. I didn't know things were this bad. I thought Riley just wanted to take pressure off you." I looked at him. My lips trembled, but I didn't let the tears fall. "You defended the person who hit your mother in front of a crowd, Caleb." The words came out gently, but I knew they pierced the deepest part of him. Caleb lowered his head. I saw his shoulders shake, as if the weight of the whole evening had just landed on him. Martin stood near the window, looking out at the roses. His voice was low and firm. "Caleb, I think it's best if you stay elsewhere for a few days. Let your mother have peace of mind. I didn't mean, I know, but sometimes consequences don't require intent." I turned away. I didn't want to watch my son's eyes brim like a scolded child. In this house, every breath felt heavy. All I could hear was Theo's old clock ticking steady, like the heartbeat of the dead still keeping watch. Caleb moved out before midnight. I stood on the porch as he carried his suitcase to the car. The headlights washed over his face, tired, smeared, young again, like the day he left for college. He hugged me, awkward and weak. "I'm sorry, Mom. I don't know how to start over." I squeezed his hand lightly. "You start by telling the truth, Caleb. Time will teach you the rest." He nodded, turned away, then looked back before getting in. In his eyes, I saw regret, fear, and loss all mixed together. I felt myself tremble, not from the cold. I was saying goodbye to the son I thought I knew best and the one who it hurt me most. When the car pulled down the drive and the red taillights faded into the night, I closed the door, leaned against the wood, and exhaled a long breath. The house held only the wind again. I sat on the sofa, hands still shaking, a hollow spreading from my chest to my stomach, as if someone had just removed part of my spirit. Close to 1 o'clock in the morning, my phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number, but I didn't need to guess. I knew it was Riley. The screen glowed in the dark, each word stark and cold. "Be realistic. I have photos, a story, and a few friends in media. If you don't want this in the news, send $60,000. I'll leave quietly and won't make a mess. You have 48 hours. I stared at the screen, my hands going rigid. $60,000. Not a huge sum compared to my assets, but filthy dirty like her hands. I set the phone on the table and slowly dialed Nora. Her voice came after a few rings. "Mrs. Janice, I'm guessing you just got a message. You already knew?" I anticipated it. People like Riley always think they can turn the tide with blackmail. What should I do? Don't pay a cent. Her threats have no legal basis. Keep the message, take screenshots, and tomorrow morning I'll send a packet to the local police. I was silent for a few seconds, then said quietly, "Thank you, Nora. I don't want to live afraid anymore. You don't have to be. The law is on your side now." I hung up and walked around the house. The hallway light cast reflections on our family photos. Me, Theo, and little Caleb. I stopped at a picture of the three of us in the rose garden in 1998. Theo's smile warmed me, then tightened my chest. If he were alive, he wouldn't be surprised. Theo always said, "Evil inside a home doesn't need a gun, just a cold sentence and a weak man." I brushed my fingers over his face in the photo and whispered, "I kept our home, Theo. But the price of truth is always higher than we think." I didn't sleep that night. I brewed a pot of black tea and sat by the window watching the moon. Before sunrise, I called the locksmith, an old acquaintance of Martin's. He arrived at 5 a.m., carrying a set of brand new smart locks. "You want everything changed? All of it? Front door, back door, and the garage." "Yes, ma'am." I watched him work. The drill and metal clicks were soft, but to me they sounded like the music of freedom. Every tightened screw, every new bolt was a step in reclaiming my ownership, not just of the house, but of my life. After he left, I took photos of every bit of damage Riley had left behind. A scratch on the dresser, a stained cushion, a strip of peeled paint in the hall. I saved everything with timestamps into a folder titled Temporary File 12:40 a.m. When I finished, I opened my old leather notebook and wrote, "Tonight, my house is as quiet as the first night, Theo. Brought me here. I'm not afraid anymore. I've seen with my own eyes once people show their true face. Nothing more needs to be said. Dirty money can't buy peace. And those who wield family as a weapon will, sooner or later, be devoured by their own greed." I closed the notebook, turned off the light, and looked out at the roses. The early breeze moved through the leaves and brushed the cream curtains I had just put back the color Theo once chose. For the first time in months, I felt I could sleep. Not because I had won, but because I no longer had to curl up and endure. The house was quiet, and so was my heart. And I knew dawn was coming, the first morning of a life where I was truly the owner of myself. 3 days after the night we parted ways, my house was truly quiet for the first time. No more high heels on the stairs, no cloying perfume trapped in the curtains. I woke early, made tea, and put on Theo's old jazz. Autumn leaves drifted through the kitchen, slow and warm, like the breath of memories finding their way back. But the peace didn't last long. That morning, Caleb called. His voice was raw, not like someone just waking up, but like a man who hadn't slept in days. "Mom, there's someone I want you to meet." I hesitated. "Who?" "A woman named Jade Alvarez. She's a private investigator I hired." "Don't worry, Mom, she's helping me find the truth about Riley." I was silent for a few seconds. Hearing that name tightened something inside me, not out of fear, but because I had waited for this for so long. They came that afternoon. Jade was mid-30s, short black hair, quick movements, eyes sharp like someone who has seen too many tricks. She shook my hand, voice low and clear. "I've reviewed the file. You should brace yourself." She opened her briefcase and spread thick documents on the table. Caleb sat across from me, fingers knotted, face pale. The first page was a photo of Riley, fresh-faced, perfect smile, sparkling eyes. Jade flipped to the second page, her voice steady. "Her legal name is Riley Ann Sloan, 36. But in a 2018 court file, she used the name Riley Anderson. At the time, she was living with a widower named Charles Denton, 15 years older. Jade glanced at me. After 2 years, he was out more than $90,000, including gambling loans in his name with a forged signature. Caleb squeezed his hands until his knuckles went white. I said nothing. I listened. Jade continued. After that, Riley left the state and switched her last name back to Sloan. Her financial records show she owes about $45,000 to a gambling company in Nevada. That may be why she needed a new target. She slid over a printout, an email screenshot to a real estate agent. Subject line: Inquiry. Selling a property when the owner is declared incapacitated. Date: 3 months ago. Sender: R. Sloanat. Jade tapped the line, her voice cool. That's when she started the plan. A chill ran down my spine. Every piece fit like a terrible puzzle I didn't want to see. Jade went on. People like Riley don't attack with brute force. They use manipulation. She isolates the victim from the few people who could help. I call it a map of isolation. She pulled a diagram, my name, Janice Middleton, in the center. Around it, Caleb, Martin, old friends, neighbors, attorney, church group. Arrows and little notes between each. Examples: Tell Caleb, Mom criticizes his wife to sow division. Block Janice from contacting Martin, say he's negative. Change locks, control phone communication. Caleb stared at the page, eyes wide. She really wrote this? There's a similar draft on her computer, saved in a folder called Plans. I recovered it from a temp drive. I swallowed. Those lines weren't just strategy, they were a predator's map. Each arrow was a cold slash across my trust. Caleb's trust. Everyone's. Caleb looked up, voice tight. Mom, I don't know how I didn't see it sooner. She made me believe you were resisting, that you didn't like anyone getting close. She said you criticized her. Said you wanted to control me. I looked at my son, and my heart twisted. Caleb went on. I thought I was protecting my wife, but I helped someone trying to destroy my mother. He covered his face with his hands, shoulders shaking. Jade glanced at me and gave a small nod as if to say, let him sit with it. I understood. Forgiving too quickly can make people think the wound didn't hurt. I set my hand on the table, my voice calm but not soft. Caleb, I don't need an apology right now. I need boundaries. I need to know that from now on, I won't be put in a position where I have to prove I'm not crazy, not cruel, not weak. Caleb lifted his head, eyes wet. I understand. You have that right. And I'm going to use it. Nora arrived the next afternoon with a stack of papers and a hot coffee. I've prepared a temporary restraining order. Riley is barred from coming within 100 yards of you, and she cannot contact you by phone or email. She placed the documents in front of me, then looked at Caleb. If she tries to reach you, record it and save the evidence. Don't respond. We'll handle it legally. Caleb nodded, but his eyes were far away. Maybe his head still churned with questions. Why did she do it? Why didn't I see? Sometimes the questions matter less than knowing where to stop. That night, after everyone left, I sat alone on the sofa and stared out the window. A light rain had started. The street lamp cast warm bands of gold across the wall through the curtains. I turned on the news. Home prices rising, real estate fraud in a neighboring state. I smiled bitterly. Somewhere inside those dry numbers live stories like mine. Elders hunted through their trust and their love. I remembered the night Riley taped the "no washing machine after 7 p.m. note on the fridge. I thought I was just being accommodating. Now I see each note was one step erasing my freedom. Worse, I let her do it before I realized. I went upstairs, sat at my desk, and opened the old notebook. On the page I wrote, what Riley wanted wasn't just money, but control. She didn't steal with a gun. She used a smile, and you should get some rest. Some predators wear the costume of family, and only when you've lost almost everything do you see their claws. I set down the pen and sighed. Outside, the rain softened to wind along the eaves. For the first time in weeks, I didn't lie awake fearing the door would open at midnight. I didn't wait for Riley's footsteps in the hall. I turned off the light, lay down, and listened to my heart beat evenly. A gentle sleep came like Theo's hand on my shoulder when he'd say, "It's done, love." Tonight I knew I was truly safe. And when moonlight poured through the window, I smiled because at last the predator had been unmasked and the prey had learned to protect herself. 2 weeks after Jade turned everything over to Nora, the first news hit like a cold slap. Riley filed for divorce. She demanded financial compensation for sacrificing her career to support her husband and listed a long set of claims: half the marital assets, $75,000 for emotional damages, and even temporary right to stay at the Middleton house to stabilize her life. I read the copy of the petition and felt my heartbeat slow. I wasn't surprised. To people like Riley, failure is just a setup for bargaining. But this time, she picked the wrong opponent. Nora called me the morning she got the file. Her voice was calm with a hint of dry irony. She wants money for sacrificing her career? When all income for the last 3 years was charged on Caleb's credit cards in your name. I let out a quiet breath. She never really worked. I know. And now we'll prove it in court. 3 days later, Nora filed an official response with a wall of evidence attached. The video of Riley shoving me, the appraisal invoice and emails to an agent before she planned to sell the house. Investigator Jade's report on her history of financial fraud, gambling debts, and forged signatures. The blackmail messages after she left, plus bank statements showing transfers from an online gambling account. Nora said, "When the court sees this file, they'll understand sacrificed career is just lipstick over deception." I sat in the law office, listening to Nora on the phone with Riley's attorney. Her tone was cool, sharp as a blade. Instead of demands, your client should focus on cooperation. We've submitted evidence of abuse, and under California Family Code Section 4320, that conduct directly impacts asset division. On the bun. Other end, I imagine they were sweating. A week later, the temporary hearing was held. A small courtroom, low ceiling, cold white lights. I sat behind Nora, hands steady. Caleb was there too, pale, like a man relearning how to breathe. When Riley walked in, she looked different, hair hastily tied, blotchy makeup, none of her old swagger in her eyes. But the moment she sat, she gave me a half smile, as if she still believed she could flip the board. The judge, an older, stern woman, flipped through the thick stack Nora had filed. After 10 minutes, she looked up. "I've seen the video and the emails." Her gaze settled on Riley for a few seconds. "Mrs. Sloan Middleton, per the rules, I'm granting a temporary restraining order of 200 yards. Her voice was even, each word falling like stone. "Additionally, I recommend you pause all financial claims until the forensic audit is complete." Riley gaped, ready to speak, but her attorney tugged her sleeve for silence. Caleb stared down, eyes red. I only gave the judge a small nod, a quiet thank you. On our way out, Nora murmured, "I expect they'll propose a settlement soon." Exactly as she said. 2 days later, Riley's side emailed. Her lawyer used gentle phrasing, a conditional financial mediation to protect both parties' reputations. I looked at Nora and asked, "What does both parties' reputations mean?" She smiled. "It means they want money to disappear quietly." I asked, "And you?" "I think there aren't two sides here. There's a victim and a user." We didn't respond. 3 days later, they went silent. The media pressure Riley once threatened never materialized. No outlet had a story to print. They all knew touching a file under protective order could earn them a countersuit. A few of Caleb's friends whispered that Riley had bragged she'd get the mother-in-law on TV. But within 2 weeks, the name Riley Middleton vanished from forums as if she'd never existed. I didn't feel triumphant. What I felt was a strange emptiness. That woman caused so many cracks, yet when she disappeared, all I heard was a long stretch of quiet. That quiet, heavy as it was the beginning of peace. Caleb started therapy on Nora's advice. He texted me, "I need to understand why I didn't see the truth sooner." I read it and didn't reply. I know awakening doesn't come in a single night. A week later, the post office brought a hand-addressed envelope. Caleb's handwriting. I opened it. Just a few lines scribbled, "Mom, it took me 3 months to accept that Riley wasn't the person I loved. She was the person I needed to learn a lesson from. I'm not asking you to forgive me yet, but I want you to know I'm learning how to be your son again. I love you, and I'm sorry." I folded the letter and carefully placed it in the drawer with my journal. I didn't write back. Not because I was angry, but because I wasn't ready. Some cracks need time to dry before you touch them. I spent the rest of my time in the rose garden. The deep purple rose bushes Theo planted years ago had grown wide, shading the path. I trimmed the dry branches, built up the roots, fertilized, and watered them early in the morning. Each time dew fell onto a petal, I felt time healing me. These past months, I took up my nightly journaling again. No longer recording events, just reminders to myself. Freedom doesn't come from winning a case. It comes from no longer being controlled by fear. A house isn't where you live, it's where you're respected. One morning at the end of the month, Nora called, "Have you heard? Riley left the state." I frowned slightly. Left? Yes. Creditors found her. She owes on credit cards, gambling, even legal fees. No one knows exactly where she went. Police only said she sold the Lexus and disappeared in Nevada. I was quiet for a moment. Maybe that's the price of lying. Nora nodded over the phone. For people like her, things don't end in court. They end in oblivion. I stood on the balcony, watching the morning sun come through the roses. A light breeze carried the smell of damp earth, the scent of something restored to its rightful owner. I knew this wasn't a happy ending in the fairy tale sense. But to me, victory wasn't seeing the wicked punished. It was living without fear of a knock at midnight. I closed the garden gate and went back inside. In the kitchen, the teapot was still steaming. My notebook lay open on the table, and beside it was Caleb's letter, the one I still hadn't answered. I set a freshly cut rose on top and whispered, "Maybe someday I'll write back when we both have the courage to start over." Outside, light slipped through the glass and touched Theo's photo on the wall. His smile was gentle, as if saying, "You kept the house, Janice," and for the first time in years I believed he was. Right. One early fall morning, the phone rang. I recognized Caleb's voice, low, slow, without the rush of a man who used to end every call with, "I'm busy, Mom." "Mom, I want to see you." "Not at the house, if that's hard for you." "At Rosewood Park." "Tomorrow morning?" I paused for a few seconds. Since that birthday night, we'd only exchanged short texts. Not out of hate, but because I needed space to look at everything. "All right," I said. "Tomorrow, 10 a.m. Rosewood is the park Theo loved." He'd say, "What's more peaceful than a place people visit just to look at trees?" I arrived early and sat on a bench by the pond. Maple leaves lay everywhere, gold and orange along the path. Soft sunlight skimmed the water like a thin silk sheet. Caleb was 10 minutes late. He wore a gray jacket, hair cut shorter, thinner than before. As he came closer, I noticed the biggest change. His eyes no longer carried certainty, they held caution, the kind that appears when someone truly starts looking at himself. He sat without meeting my eyes. After a moment, he spoke. "Mom, there's something I have to say." I kept quiet. Caleb took a long breath. When Riley started talking about rearranging the house, I didn't protest. Truth is, part of me agreed. A part of me, Mom, wanted that house too. Not because I needed it, but because I thought I deserved it after Dad died, after all those years there. He gave a tight laugh, eyes wet. I kept telling myself I was just helping you get organized, but really I was helping myself feel in control. I was greedy, Mom. Not for money, for control. Riley saw that and fed it with praise. "You're the only one strong enough to run this family," she said, and I believed her. He shook his head, voice catching. I let a stranger turn my pride into a weapon against my own mother. I stayed silent. Some things can't be interrupted. Words wedged in the middle can snap the fragile. Line of courage just forming. Caleb went on. "I'm not asking you to forgive me yet. I just want you to know I'm learning to face who I really am. Not the perfect son, not the rock, but someone who was weak, who was selfish. I looked at my son, the man I thought I'd lost forever. I spoke quietly, each word clear. Owning the mistake is the first step, Caleb. Repairing it is the long road." He nodded, eyes red. "I know. And I'm ready to walk it, however long it takes." We sat watching the water for a long while. A duck glided by, leaving small ripples that faded away. I took a long breath and said, "If you truly want to repair this, we'll start small." Caleb looked up, eyes expectant. "We'll meet once a week, in public, like this park." For the first 3 meetings, no talk about the house. "Okay," he answered softly. "I agree. We'll talk about what made you the person you are today and what made me the mother you forgot." Caleb smiled a little, for the first time in months. "You still teach like when I was a kid. People don't stop being mothers when their children grow up, Caleb. They just change how they teach." In the weeks after, we kept our agreement. In week 1, Caleb talked about therapy, the program Nora recommended. He said the therapist helped him see the barrier with Mom formed after Dad died. "I was afraid you were fragile, so I tried to carry everything, but the more I carried, the more I wanted control." And Riley turned control into power. I said softly, "Exactly. She made me believe love needs a winner." In week 2, Caleb talked about journaling in therapy. He wrote about being addicted to praise every time Riley said, "Only you understand me." He felt worthy. She knew exactly how to make me need her, and when I started to doubt, she said, "You were trying to divide us." A lie is easier to believe than the truth when it's told in a sweet voice. I said half to him, half to myself. In week 3, we finally talked about me. I told Caleb about the loneliness of an elder stripped of authority in her own home. Do you know what that feels like? When people say you should rest, what they mean is you no longer get to decide. I gave a thin smile, voice unsteady. They don't have to force you out. They just make you feel unnecessary. Caleb bowed his head, voice rough. "I made you feel that way." "Yes," I nodded, "but now you're making me feel heard again." After 3 meetings, we wrote 10 commitments, splitting the page in half. My 5. 1. Not weaponizing the past when you're genuinely trying to repair. 2. Not using my hurt as a weapon. 3. Listening more, speaking less. 4. Teaching from experience, not from guilt. 5. Keeping a path open for mother and son, however narrow. Caleb's 5. 1. Not denying the truth even when it shames me. 2. Not letting anyone come between us again. 3. Not defining love by money or power. Number 4. Respecting the boundaries you set. 5. Remembering kindness has no price, only the condition of honesty. We signed 2 copies, exchanged them, and smiled. Not a cheerful smile, but one lit by a beginning. At the end, Caleb pulled a key ring from his pocket. "Mom, I want to return these." I looked and recognized the spare keys to Middleton House, the ones Riley used to keep in her purse. Caleb set them in my hand, voice firm. I don't want the right to enter when you're not there. If you agree, I'd like a guest key only used when you call me or when you're present. I held the keys, heavy like a cymbal. Not heavy from metal, but from what they'd represented, the imbalance between trust and betrayal. I spoke slowly. I agree. You can keep a guest key, but remember, I'm offering a chance, not power. Caleb nodded. I understand. I don't want power anymore. I just want my mother back. I had to turn away to hide, the tear that rose. I smiled and answered softly, I'm still here, Caleb. I just don't need to be rescued anymore. We sat a while longer, watching the leaves fall. Far off, children chased each other across the grass, laughter bright in the breeze. Caleb asked, How long do you think until I can come home? I didn't answer right away. I looked up. The light flickered through the leaves. When you truly understand that a home isn't about having keys, it's about having responsibility, I said, then the door will open by itself. Caleb was quiet, but I saw it in his eyes, a small light, faint but real. I knew he'd started finding himself again. When we said goodbye, he hugged me, not an apology hug, but the embrace of someone who knows he still has a chance. I watched him walk away, the early autumn wind moving through my hair. Inside me, there was no anger, only a small, steady belief that sometimes the hardest thing isn't forgiving someone, else it's being strong enough to forgive while keeping your boundaries. I walked slowly toward the car, feeling a little lighter. In my hand, the keys were cold metal, but in my heart, I knew I was holding something else. Control over a life I thought I'd lost for good. Time moved faster than I expected. Since we met at Rosewood Park, more than 8 months had passed. Winter faded, the garden bloomed again, and Theo's deep purple roses once more lined the path. Every morning I still watered, journaled, brewed tea, and played Fly Me to the Moon, small habits that brought the house back to life piece by piece. Caleb now lives in a small apartment in Maple Grove, about a 15-minute drive from my house. I used to fear that distance would push my son farther away, but it turned out to be the best medicine. Distance helps people see themselves clearly. He lives simply, steady work, paying all his own bills, no more cocktail parties or promising but vague investment schemes. When I visited once, I noticed a small sign on the wall. No debt, no borrowing, no living off anyone. 3 handwritten lines, but I understood. They were Caleb's 3 new boundaries. Then one evening he called, Mom, I want to introduce someone. No rush, I just think you'll like her. I smiled and asked gently, What's her name? Eva Monroe. She teaches art at the nearby high school. I didn't say it, but a tightness passed through me. I didn't resent Caleb having someone new, I was just afraid of history repeating. At my age, that fear doesn't come from jealousy or control, but from the instinct of someone who's been deeply hurt. We met 3 weeks later. Eva arrived exactly on time, neither early nor late. Mid-30s, short neat brown hair, a pale blue linen dress, a simple silver bracelet at her neck. When she shook my hand, she looked straight at me, her voice warm and clear. It's very nice to meet you, Mrs. Middleton. Caleb has told me a lot about you. I smiled lightly. I hope he told the truth. She smiled, eyes bright. Partly, he's still learning how to tell it correctly. I laughed. No one had ever spoken about Caleb like that. No flattery, no evasion. That coffee went smoothly. Eva spoke just enough, no showiness, no trying to win me over. When Caleb stepped away to order, she turned to me, straightforward. Please don't worry. I don't want to change him. I only want to walk with him if he truly wants that. I looked at her and felt something settle. For the first time, I saw a woman who wasn't looking for a place in Middleton House, only a place in Caleb's own heart. 2 months later, Caleb called, Mom, Eva and I are serious, but there's something that surprised me and made me feel lighter. What is it? She said if we marry someday, she wants a clear prenup. We each keep our own assets, no entanglement. I fell silent for a few seconds, then laughed. Then I should send Eva flowers. I think so too, Caleb said, sounding more at ease than I expected. For the first time, I feel like loving someone doesn't come with duty or power. When Caleb asked about dinner with Eva, I agreed with conditions. A neutral place, not your place, not mine. Okay. And no one mentions the value of the house. Not because I'm afraid, but because I want to know what you've truly learned. Caleb was quiet for a few seconds, then said, I understand. We chose a small restaurant downtown, the one Theo took me to on our first dates. Our table was by the window, facing the lights of passing cars. Eva arrived 5 minutes early and ordered water for the table. When Caleb arrived, she smiled. I ordered black tea for you. I know you're cutting back on coffee. I noticed the way Caleb looked at her, no worship, like with Riley. It was equality and gratitude. Dinner was warm, no boasting, no scorekeeping. We talked about paintings, books, and teaching. Eva shared stories about difficult but endearing students. I told the story of Theo trying to learn to draw for me and giving up because I drew a cat and it came out a bear. We all laughed, and in that moment, Caleb's smile looked natural, no defenses, no pretense. From that day on, Caleb began making amends with actions, not promises. He came to my house every weekend, fixed the rotting wooden fence out back, repainted the gate, and replaced the hallway bulbs. No fuss, no announcement, just a small note on the kitchen table. It's done, Mom. Once, he took me to an eye appointment. When I said, I can drive myself, Caleb just smiled. I know, but you've taken care of others your whole life. Let me take care of you for one afternoon. That's not unfair. I didn't argue. At my age, I've learned that receiving is also a way to love. One afternoon, Nora called, her voice light like she'd been waiting for this. A moment, a long time. Congratulations, Mrs. Janice. The divorce is finalized. Riley can take only her personal items and clothes. No assets, no payout. I sat down, my hands trembling slightly. Not from joy, but because that awful chapter had finally, truly closed. Thank you, Nora. Not just for the case, but for showing me women can be strong at any age. Nora laughed. You've been doing that yourself for a long time. I only delivered the judgment. That evening, I cooked the first dinner in nearly 2 years with Caleb back at the table. Honey-roasted chicken and mashed potatoes, just the way he likes it. I sent my son a short message. If you're not busy, come home for dinner tonight. No need to say anything, just eat. Around 7 p.m., the doorbell rang. Caleb stood outside with a bouquet of white chrysanthemums. For you, he said, his voice a little tight. Because you did what I couldn't. You kept the house, and you kept your heart. I took the flowers and set them in a vase in the center of the table. We sat down to a simple meal that felt strangely warm. No one mentioned Riley. No one mentioned the hard days. There was only the soft clink of silverware, the wind at the window, and a feeling I thought I'd lost forever safety. When we finished, Caleb helped me wash the dishes. I stood beside him, drying each plate, and said slowly, You know, I didn't think we'd ever have this day. Caleb looked up, his eyes gentler. Me neither. But sometimes miracles don't come from prayers, they come from lessons so painful they force you to change. I smiled and nodded, and from having the courage to walk back into the house that once hurt you. That night, after Caleb left, I stepped onto the porch and looked at the rose garden in the moonlight. The wind carried the smell of earth, flowers, and things that had come back to life. I whispered to Theo, Do you see? I kept my promise. Our home is still a place of love, not a battlefield. At 72, I understand this. Forgiveness doesn't erase the past, it only opens a path for the future to begin. And tonight, When the door of Middleton House closed behind me, for the first time in a very long while, I knew I'd truly come home, not just in body, but in heart. A year after the night Caleb came back for dinner, the rose garden bloomed at its fullest again. The deep purple blooms colored the path, and their fragrance made me think of Theo, the man who believed all his life that every storm passes if we stand firm. That morning, Caleb called. His voice held a little excitement, but it was warmer and steadier than ever. "Mom, I have something to tell you." "Another coming home conversation?" He gave a small laugh. "No, Mom. It's about building a home in my own way." And then he said he'd proposed to Eva. I was quiet for a few seconds. In Caleb's voice, I heard a calm I hadn't heard in years. No theatrics, no empty promises, just the steadiness of a man who had fallen and learned how to stand up the right way. That afternoon, Eva came by. She hugged me lightly and spoke softly. "I know I don't need permission, but I want to listen to you first. If you're not truly comfortable, Caleb and I will wait." I looked at her and saw something in her eyes. Riley never had respect. I smiled and nodded. "I only need to know my son is loved with freedom, not with conditions." She squeezed my hand and smiled brightly. "Then I believe this is the right beginning." The wedding was small, in the rose garden behind Middleton House. Just a few relatives, a few friends, and Martin, my brother, stood as officiant. Caleb wore a gray suit. Eva wore a simple white dress, no diamonds, no champagne, just soft music and the scent of orchids drifting in the breeze. When Martin raised his glass, he spoke slowly, his voice as steady as ever. "To those who dare to say no at the right time and dare to begin again, even late." We clinked glasses, and sunlight flashed through crystal, bright as a blessing. I sat quietly watching my son and his bride dance. The old pain seemed to dissolve into the air, not gone, but no longer throbbing. It had become soil where something new could grow. When the reception ended, Caleb came to me and kissed my forehead. "Mom, I promise, I will never touch Middleton House." I smiled and exhaled, as if setting down a weight I'd carried far too long. "You don't need to promise, just remember this house doesn't need a guard. It needs someone who knows how to cherish it." A few weeks later, I met Nora again. She looked at me and recognized I was no longer the trembling woman who'd signed papers a year ago. "You seem lighter." "Because I've learned how to trust again," I said, then opened my bag and handed her a folder. "I want to update my personal will." Nora looked it over and smiled. "The Theodore and Janice Middleton Art Scholarship Fund." "Sounds beautiful." I nodded. "Instead of leaving money for someone to hold, I want to leave chances for others to begin. Maybe somewhere there's a girl painting in a small room who still believes in the good." Nora set a hand on my shoulder. "You didn't just keep the house, you kept its spirit." I answered, my voice low. "Keeping myself, that's the real victory, Nora." That night I opened the old leather journal, the one where I'd once recorded every piece of evidence, every hurt. On the last page I wrote, "Boundaries aren't walls. Boundaries are love that knows how to protect itself. When we say enough, it doesn't mean we don't love. It means we love enough not to turn ourselves into victims anymore." I closed the journal and set it in the drawer beside Theo's wedding band. Outside, the night wind stirred the curtains. Late one evening, I stepped onto the porch with a hot cup of tea and watched the small lights flicker across the roses. The wind carried their sweetness, and in the rustle of leaves I heard Theo's voice, deep, warm, far and near at once. "I always knew you'd do it, Janice." I looked up at the sky and smiled. "I kept the house, Theo, but more important, I kept myself." I closed my eyes and let the breeze move through my silver hair, letting my heart drift like the last leaf of the season, not forgetting, but feeling peace in memories carefully put back in place. If someone asked me what peace is, I'd say, It's when you can walk through the room that once made you shake and not feel afraid. It's when you can remember the person who hurt you and no longer feel hatred. It's when you know the past no longer orders the present. I once thought that to go on, I had to forget. But now I know peace isn't forgetting, it's remembering without pain. I added one last line to my journal. If anyone is being dismissed, being pushed out of their own home, remember, keep records, install evidence, find trustworthy allies, and never back down, even when they say you're too old to fight. Before bed, I opened the window. The moon sank, laying a soft gold light over the house. Middleton House was no longer a battleground, but a home again, the place where a woman learned that true love always walks hand in hand with boundaries. I smiled and whispered, "Good night, Theo. Thank you for leaving me a house where I could learn to become the owner of myself." Then I returned to the table and lit a small candle, letting its warm shimmer touch our old photograph, the smiles still full, as if there had never been any parting. If this story made you pause to remember yourself for a boundary, a hurt, or a time you had to be strong, tell me where you're listening from. I don't need numbers. I just want to know that somewhere out there, someone is awake, listening, and finding faith again the way I once did. Even one comment, one like, or one small subscription can be the hand you extend to those who feel lost, letting them know they're not alone. Thank you for staying until the end, for sharing your time to walk through this story with me. I'll see you in the next one, where we'll find another piece of peace amid all the things we thought we'd lost.
I woke up after the accident, my head spinning, still lying on the stretcher, when I heard the nurse say, "We called your only listed family member. Your son said he doesn't have time to come." My whole body stiffened. My son, Mason, the little boy who once cried just because I burned my hand, was now saying I was causing trouble. But before my tears could fall, I heard another sentence, one that froze every part of me. He asked whether you listed anyone as beneficiary if your condition got worse. They didn't know. I had just inherited $38 million from my maternal aunt, and Mason had no idea. I closed my eyes. If my son had changed this much, then I would have to force him to reveal who he truly was. If you're still listening, tell me where you're watching from. Every comment you leave is another mark in this journey. And if this story has touched you, don't forget to hit like, so it can reach even further. My name is Evelyn Hart, 68 years old, living in a small town on the outskirts of Orlando. Throughout my life, I had only one child, Mason Hart, and one remaining relative I still kept in touch with, my Aunt Margaret Hale, my mother's older sister. She lived alone most of her life. No husband, no children, few social ties, but she gave me a kind of attention I never fully understood. Only when she passed suddenly from a stroke and her attorney called me to his office did I learn what she had left for me. Real estate, stocks, bonds, investment accounts, totaling $38 million. I could barely breathe when I saw the numbers. A woman living on a dental office assistant's salary never imagines owning millions. I immediately thought of Mason, of his small family, of the grandchild I hoped I would have someday. I just wanted to share that joy with my son. My heart was full of hope then, naive hope that my love would be returned. That's why, after meeting with Aunt Margaret's attorney, I drove straight to Mason's house. I didn't want to call. I wanted to see the look on my son's face when he heard that his life was about to change forever. But halfway there, everything changed in a way I could have never imagined. A silver SUV ran a red light and slammed straight into the side of my car. The sound of metal twisting was so sharp I thought the whole world shattered. I didn't know how long I was unconscious. I only vaguely remembered the sound of sirens and the blinding hospital ceiling lights. When I woke up, I was lying on a stretcher, one arm in a brace, my chest aching so much that even breathing was hard. The nurse said I had a fractured left arm, 2 cracked ribs, and a mild concussion. I asked, dazed, whether anyone knew I was there, and the answer pierced straight into my heart. We called Mason Hart. He said, "He's busy." I thought I misheard. Mason had never missed my birthday or Christmas, not even a phone call. He used to be the most affectionate child I knew. But over the past few years, ever since he met Chloe, things had shifted, slowly but clearly, like a receding tide I hadn't noticed until the shore was bare and sharp. I told myself he might be in the middle of something important. Maybe he panicked and didn't know what to do. But then the nurse continued, crushing every excuse I tried to make for him. He only asked, if you didn't make it, who your assets would go to. A choked sound escaped me, but no words formed. My chest hurt so much I had to close my eyes to keep from breaking down. At that moment, no one knew about the inheritance. Mason least of all. I could only think one thing. If he reacted like that when he thought I might die, what kind of man would he become if he knew I was about to have $38 million? The next day, when the pounding in my head eased a little, I called Mason. I had practiced how to sound gentle, how to keep my voice steady, but even when he heard how weak I was, his voice stayed indifferent. "Mom, I already know. They called from the hospital. It's just an accident. Don't make everything a big deal." "But I was unconscious," I said, my voice trembling. "But you're awake now, right? I'm in the middle of something. I'll stop by when I'm free." He spoke as though I had simply cut a finger chopping vegetables, not as someone who had nearly died. I hung up, my hands still shaking. I felt like I had stepped into another world, a world where a mother no longer had value beyond what she could offer. During the 6 days I stayed in the hospital, neither Mason nor Chloe came. Not once. No calls, no messages. The nurses changed my IV bags more often than anyone checked on my well-being. I wasn't even sure whether the tears I shed were from pain or heartbreak. When I was discharged, the Florida sun was blazing as usual, but I felt cold to my bones. I braced myself on the taxi door, took a deep breath, and felt like someone entirely different, a woman who had just lost her last piece of innocence. On that ride home, I made a decision. I would not tell Mason anything about the $38 million. Not a word. I needed to know what had changed him into someone who saw his own mother as a burden. I needed to know whether Chloe was influencing him or whether something darker had been inside him all along, something I had failed to see. I needed to see Mason clearly, so clearly that no doubt could cloud my judgment, and only then would I decide whether my son deserved to know his mother had become a millionaire. That night, when I returned to the small house I had lived in for 27 years, I removed the hospital bandage from my arm, set my bag down on the kitchen table, and looked around the familiar room. A chill moved through the air. I didn't know what I would find. But I knew one thing for certain. My life had entered a new chapter, and in this chapter, I was no longer the soft-hearted mother I used to be. 2 weeks after leaving the hospital, my home fell back into its familiar silence. The old air conditioner humming in the corner of the living room, the muted sounds of the neighborhood drifting through the window. I thought Mason would call at least once to ask how my recovery was going, but my phone stayed still on the table, the screen blank. No messages except supermarket ads. I didn't know what hurt worse, the bruises still fading on my chest, or the absolute silence from the child I once believed would never turn his back on me. On the 14th day, my phone finally rang. The caller wasn't Mason. It was Chloe. Her voice came fast, clipped, as if making the call was an inconvenience. "Evelyn, can you watch Lily for me Saturday afternoon? Mason and I have an important client meeting." I looked at my still bandaged arm and the bruises running along my ribs. "I'm still recovering, Chloe. The doctor told me to avoid any strain." Silence. Not the empathetic kind, the irritated kind. "Oh." Chloe let out a short, cold sound. "I thought you'd try a little. It's just sitting with her. It's not like you do anything all day." A tightness formed in my throat. I need to rest. Chloe exhaled sharply, muttered a forced thank you, and hung up before I could respond. That moment, I realized they didn't care about me at all. They only cared about what they could take. My time, my labor, my willingness. And if they knew about the $38 million, they would want far more. That night, I stared out the window at the dew forming on the grass, my chest hollow. I wondered, how long had it been since Mason genuinely asked how I was doing? How long since he hugged me just because he wanted to? I couldn't remember, but I wasn't ready to give up on him. Not yet. I still believed people could be influenced by those they love, and in this case, that influence was Chloe, sharp-tongued, calculating, always steering the conversation toward expenses, financial burdens, and how older people should simplify their money to avoid causing trouble. One afternoon, I decided to try something. I called Mason. He picked up on the third ring, sounding rushed. "Mom, what's wrong? I'm busy." I swallowed my hurt, keeping my voice steady. "Mason, I have news about Aunt Margaret." Silence. Then, not concern for me or sorrow about her passing, but, "Did she leave anything?" My heart dropped. I answered slowly, "Just an old house. It's run down." I heard Mason breathe out, a long, disappointed exhale. "Oh, well, that doesn't help us." I didn't respond. If I did, I would have cried. How could my worth be measured against the value of someone else's inheritance? "How's your health?" Mason added, sounding polite but not sincere. "Decent," I said softly, ending the call before my voice cracked. That call rearranged every suspicion in my mind into a clear picture. Mason wasn't just distant, he was calculating, and he had changed after marrying Chloe. I replayed every vague remark she'd ever made about finances and responsibilities. Then I thought she was venting. Now I realized she'd been planting ideas, slowly, deliberately. From that day, I began noting every odd detail, not for revenge, for protection. A woman my age understands vulnerability in ways younger people never consider. I kept a small notebook, writing down dates, phrases, reactions. I wasn't sure if I would need it, but having it gave me strength. One evening, while preparing a simple dinner, chicken soup with carrots, I heard my phone vibrate across the counter. Mason had dialed someone, but accidentally left his phone on speaker. I only heard it because I was near the sink. His voice, low but unmistakable. "You're right. Mom really is acting strange. She asked the same thing 3 times yesterday." Then Chloe's sharper voice. "I told you, the accident weakened her. This is the perfect time to talk about reorganizing her finances before things get complicated." "Let's wait," Mason murmured. "Maybe see how she is for a bit." "Why wait? She lives alone. No supervision. A few more signs and we can request to help manage her assets. You know, older people are easy targets." Something inside me went cold. The way she said older people sounded like she was describing prey. I stepped back instinctively, heart pounding in my ears. Mason didn't defend me. He didn't tell her I was fine. He let her words hang in the air. I stood there for a long moment staring at the warm kitchen lights reflecting on the counter like fractured memories. I once thought recording conversations was for paranoid people. Now I understood. When your own child begins viewing you through the lens of personal gain, you are no longer in a family. You are in a negotiation, and you are the weaker party. I placed my hand on the cold countertop, steadying myself. What I heard was not random chatter. It was the start of a plan. I didn't know what they intended, but I knew this. Mason and Chloe had begun preparing. And I had to prepare too, not because I wanted to fight my son, but because I refused to become a victim of the people I loved most. Deep down, I sensed the truth. This was only the beginning of a storm forming on the horizon, a storm I would have to face alone. The night I overheard Mason and Chloe's conversation, I barely slept. Their words pricked into me like tiny needles, silent yet painfully sharp. I lay in bed, one hand on my chest, feeling each breath come faster than the last. I wasn't sure what frightened me more, that Mason was planning something, or that I no longer recognized my own son. Around 2 a.m., I sat up and turned on the bedside lamp. The warm light fell on a row of family photos. Mason, at 7 years old, smiling wide as I taught him to ride a bike. Mason at his high school graduation, proudly holding my hand. Mason on his wedding day, shy and glowing, while I cried tears of joy. Looking at those moments made something in my chest ache deeply. "How far have you gone, Mason?" I whispered. I needed the truth, not the version Mason might tell me, but the real truth. I needed to know what he and Chloe were planning, discussing, calculating. I needed to know how much of a threat they could become, and I needed proof. The next morning, I called Aunt Margaret's attorney, Mr. Stephen Doyle, a patient man who always spoke gently, almost like family. When I told him a small part of what was happening, his voice dropped to a grave tone. "Evelyn, let me connect you with someone. You shouldn't face this alone." That was the first time I heard the name Robert Kane. Robert arrived the following afternoon. He was in his 50s, hair flecked with gray, face stern, yet eyes steady and kind. Wearing a light blue shirt and a simple brown jacket, he didn't look like the kind of investigator you see on television, but his presence radiated competence and calm. "I've heard the outline from Mr. Doyle," he said as we sat at the kitchen table, "but I'd like to hear it from you. Everything, from the beginning." I breathed in slowly and began. The accident, the hospital, Mason's cold reaction, Chloe's phone call, the conversation I overheard. My voice trembled when I reached the part where Chloe suggested I might no longer be mentally sharp. Robert didn't interrupt, didn't react with shock. He simply listened, writing notes in a worn leather notebook. When I finally stopped, he looked up. "You believe they may try to gain control of your finances?" "I don't want to believe it," I whispered, staring at my hands. But I heard them, and if Chloe said it once, she'll say it again. Robert nodded, his voice firm. "You were right to call. If they have such intentions, we'll need evidence. Evidence they can't deny." I took an envelope from the cabinet, the one with photos of Mason and Chloe, one from their wedding, one from Christmas 3 years ago. I placed them on the table. "I want you to investigate their finances. And..." I paused, then said each word clearly. "I want to know what they say when I'm not there." Robert didn't ask further. He simply looked at me for a long moment, as if making sure I was strong enough to face the truth. Then he placed the photos into his file folder. "I'll begin right away. Keep everything normal. Don't let them know you're suspicious." I nodded, even as my throat tightened. 3 days later, Robert called me. His voice was brief. "Evelyn, I need to see you. Tonight." All day I paced through the living room, checking the clock countless times. When Robert arrived, Florida's sky had already dimmed into early dusk. He set a thick document bag on the table and opened it. One by one, photographs were spread before me. In the pictures, Mason and Chloe were sitting in an expensive restaurant in Winter Park, champagne on the table, both smiling brightly. The date in the corner, the second day after my accident. The day the doctor said I was still under risk of complication observation. This was the day I was in the ICU. I touched the corner of the photo and it burned like a cut. "That's right," Robert said. "They were celebrating. And according to the recording I obtained, it wasn't just because of Mason's new contract." I looked up, waiting. Robert took out a small recorder and pressed play. Mason's voice came on, tinged with pride. "I didn't think Mom would wake up that fast. This accident came at the right time." Then Chloe's voice, sharp and precise. "I told you, this is the best chance for you to request guardianship. The weaker she looks, the easier things will be." I felt my heart drop into my stomach. Robert turned the recorder off. "There's more." He played a second clip, this one softer, like a busy cafe in the background. Mason said, "She's been forgetting things lately. Looks like she's not as sharp anymore." Chloe replied, "Good. Just let a few small incidents happen. Who would know? She's old. One forgotten moment, one confused moment. And that's all the justification we need." I clenched my hands until my knuckles turned white. "Small incidents," I repeated, my voice rough. "They're talking about creating false evidence?" Robert looked at me with sympathy, but also honesty. "I believe so." I didn't cry. I thought I would. But instead, a quiet, steel-like stillness slid into my chest. Not weakness, something deeper, the sound of trust breaking. The words Mason once whispered as a child, "I'll protect you forever, Mom," shattered into sharp fragments inside me. The pain quickly hardened into resolve. "I understand," I said softly. "They don't see me as family anymore." Robert nodded. "They see you as a target." I thought, Mason was just influenced by Chloe. I looked down at the photos. But no, he chose this path. Robert stayed silent, letting me breathe. After a moment, he asked, "Do you want to continue, Evelyn? What we find next? Maybe worse." I lifted my head. For the first time in weeks, my eyes didn't tremble. "I want to know everything. I need to know how far my son has gone." I pushed the stack of photos slightly away, as if that tiny distance might help me breathe. "And I need your help, not just to defend myself, but to make sure they can't harm me." Robert nodded, his expression firm. "Then we'll see this through." In that moment, I understood that my life had entered a new chapter. Not an easy one, not gentle, but one I had no choice but to right myself, with clarity, strength, and the sharp awareness of a woman who had stood at the edge of death with no family beside her. I looked toward the window where the streetlights cast a soft yellow glow. Family was no longer a place of safety. It had become a place I had to defend myself from, and from that moment on, I knew I was no longer the quiet, blindly trusting Evelyn. I was a woman who had been forced to stand up against the very son I had raised with my whole heart. I sat in the living room for a long time after Robert left, my hand still resting on the photos showing Mason and Chloe celebrating on the very day I was in intensive care. Their bright faces, the champagne glasses touching, my son's smile. It all felt like a blade pressed against the softest part of me, but that piercing pain transformed into something unexpected, cold clarity. If they saw me as a target, then I had to see them as opponents. Motherly love couldn't protect me anymore. Only careful preparation could. The next morning, I went to Aunt Margaret's attorney's office. Mr. Doyle was already waiting, and Robert arrived a few minutes later. We sat in a small meeting room with soft window light, though the air felt thick enough to slice. I told them everything Robert had uncovered, and when I finished, I spoke the sentence I never imagined I would one day say, I need a plan to protect myself from my own son. No one in the room was surprised, and that brought me a strange sense of relief. They didn't see me as paranoid or frail. They saw me as a woman trying to take back control of her life after being pushed to the edge. Mr. Doyle opened a new file. Evelyn, you have two categories of assets. Assets that must be protected absolutely, and assets that can be used as bait. Robert nodded. If they're truly plotting, we need them to believe their plan is working. People make mistakes when they feel confident. I shivered slightly at the word bait, never imagining I'd use my own vulnerability to lure my son into a trap he dug himself. But the price of misplaced trust was this, and I was willing to pay it. We divided the inheritance, $36 million transferred into a special trust, accessible only if a medical evaluation confirmed my full mental competency or if I personally approved access. No one, not even Mason with any potential power of attorney, could touch it. The remaining $2 million were used to purchase a new beachfront home on Key Biscayne, titled under an LLC known only to me and the attorney. It would not only be a refuge, but the starting point for my new life when the time came. After signing the documents, a weight lifted from my chest, as if I had closed a door between Mason and the money that could destroy us all. The next step was installing hidden cameras in my current house. Robert chose the spots himself: the living room, hallway, front and back door, and a small camera disguised inside a potted plant in the kitchen. Not to spy on them, he said, to document anything that happens when they visit. I didn't object. The sacred trust between mother and child had cracked long ago, and my safety mattered more than old ideals. The hardest part came next: acting. I had to convince Mason and Chloe that my health was failing, that my memory was slipping, that I was confused. I had to play the very role I hated seeing in movies, the frail older woman. But now it was my only shield. The first time I saw them after leaving the hospital was on a Sunday afternoon. Mason arrived first, Chloe next, carrying a pastry bag as a show of friendliness, though her eyes darted around like always, calculating. "Mom, you look better," Mason said, forcing a smile. I returned a vague smile. "Mason, what day is it again?" He paused. "Sunday, Mom." "Oh, I thought it was Wednesday." I let out a light laugh, subtle, believable, just enough to plant doubt. I saw two opposite expressions in that moment. Mason, his eyes dimmed, the corner of his mouth twitched, a mix of pity and confirmation. He wanted to believe I was weakening. Chloe, her eyes lit up, as though the missing piece of her puzzle had clicked into place. She slid into the chair beside me, her voice honey-sweet in a way I had never heard. "Evelyn, you should write things down from now on. It might help. You don't need to push yourself. We can help." The false kindness in her tone made my skin crawl. She wasn't offering help. She was guiding me into the box she wanted me placed in. I pretended to think it over. "Maybe I am getting forgetful. Yesterday I forgot to turn off the stove." I let the sentence drift out, slow and troubled. Mason jumped on it instantly. "Mom, that's dangerous. Maybe I should look over your finances. I can organize everything so you don't get scammed." I looked straight at him. The look of a mother who still loved her child, but knew he was crossing a line. I nodded softly, as if considering it seriously. "Let me think about it, Mason. I need time." Disappointment flickered across his face. Chloe pressed her lips together, hiding a smile she didn't quite contain. That night, I reviewed the footage. Chloe was snooping, checking the kitchen drawers, glancing at my filing cabinet. Mason stood near the table where I kept documents, his eyes filled with a mixture of greed and pressure. They were starting to believe I was truly declining, and that was exactly what I needed. Over the next days, I released small signs, repeating a question, holding the wrong key, misnaming a dish. Not too often, just enough to deepen their perception. Chloe became unnervingly warm. She hugged me lightly before leaving, asked if she should book my doctor appointments, even brought me a book titled "Keeping Your Memory Sharp After 60" as a thoughtful little gift. Mason slipped comments into every conversation. "Mom, I just want to help." "Mom, my friend's grandmother got scammed. It happens so easily." "Mom, someone trustworthy should manage your finances just in case you forget." Every word they spoke went into my notebook, the one hidden in the drawer of my nightstand. Not out of hatred, but because one day I might need it to defend myself. I knew I couldn't rush. Greed ferments on its own. I just had to wait for it to bubble over. Wait for the moment they thought they had already won. Wait for them to drop their guard. That would be when my trap, the trap they'd never expect, would close cleanly. That afternoon, as the breeze from the small lake behind my house drifted in, scented with blooming wattle, I was preparing a snack for Lily, Chloe's daughter. She sat at the kitchen table, swinging her legs, absent-mindedly nibbling apple slices. Then she said something that made my spoon freeze in midair. "You know, Dad and Mom said you're kind of a little crazy after the accident." I slowly set the spoon down, my heart skipping a beat. "What do you mean, sweetheart?" I asked calmly. She shrugged. "They said you forget stuff. And Mom said we have to be careful because old people forget important things." I sat beside her, keeping my tone gentle. "Important things like what?" Lily poked at her apples, then repeated something she had clearly overheard. "Mom said we have to help you remember where you keep your money. Dad said it's dangerous if you don't remember. Mom said if you forget, we should help. Like, find it." Her innocence was brutal, but it revealed everything. Help her find where she keeps her money. Not help me heal, not help me feel safe. Money. I smiled warmly at Lily. "Thank you for telling me, sweetheart. You're very kind." But when I turned to grab a napkin, my hand trembled. They had gone further than I thought. By early evening, the Florida sky was painted a soft pink-orange. Lily and I were doing puzzles in the living room. I glanced at the wall clock. 6:15. Mason had said he'd pick her up at 7. I knew exactly what I needed to do. When I heard the car pull into the driveway, I intentionally stood slowly, holding a glass of water and muttering under my breath. Mason and Chloe walked in with the same warm smiles I had grown accustomed to, warm like a mask. "Is it that time already?" I asked, sounding genuinely unsure. Chloe jumped in before Mason could answer. "Of course, Evelyn. It's 8 o'clock already." I knew perfectly well that if I said 8, they'd correct me, so I deliberately said something different. "Oh, I thought it was a little after 5. I looked around in mild confusion. I'm getting old. My memory just doesn't keep up anymore. It lasted all of 3 seconds, but I saw 2 completely different reactions. Mason, his eyes darkened, the corner of his mouth twitching, a conflicted look of pity and confirmation. He wanted to believe I was failing. Chloe. Her eyes flashed in a subtle way, a hint of satisfaction slipping out before she managed to hide it. Not a smile, just a blink slower than usual, but enough for me to notice. The camera in the right corner of the living room captured everything. I continued my performance. Where did I put my keys? I rummaged through my purse, then the drawer near the door. Every movement was calculated, just messy enough to look believable. Chloe stepped closer, her gaze sweeping quickly across the document table, then the wooden cabinet against the wall, the one where I used to keep bank statements. She asked in a half-concerned, half-directive tone, "Are you sure you're all right? Maybe I should organize your paperwork so nothing gets misplaced?" "No, that's not necessary." I shook my head lightly, appearing more confused than resistant. But only minutes later, when I pretended to walk into the kitchen to make tea, Chloe seized the moment and opened the wooden cabinet. Her hands moved fast, as if she had done this many times before. She lifted each bundle of documents, flipped through a few pages, then put them back almost exactly where they were. Everything was recorded by the camera, every movement, every expression. From the kitchen doorway, with my hair partly covering my face, I watched. The sight tightened my chest, but I didn't stop her. This was what I needed, concrete evidence of intentional behavior. No more guessing, no more vague comments, actual actions. When they left, Lily hugged me tightly before getting into the car. "Don't be sad, Grandma," she said, her eyes clear and innocent. Exactly like Mason's used to be. "Of course not, sweetheart," I replied, smoothing her hair. "I'm just fine." But when the car door shut and the SUV disappeared down the street, my legs softened beneath me. I sat on the front step, arms wrapped around my chest. I wasn't weak, not at all, but my heart had taken another cut. Inside the house, I turned on the small monitor connected to the camera system. I replayed every moment. Chloe's eyes, her excitement at seeing me confused. Mason sighing with false pity. Chloe opening the cabinet to search for documents. No angle was obscured. The footage was so clear I could almost hear their thoughts. I saved everything to a backup hard drive, then called Robert. He answered after 2 rings, steady and calm as always. "Evelyn, is there something new?" "I have evidence," I said, unable to hide the slight tremor in my voice. "Clear evidence they've moved forward." Robert arrived in less than an hour. He reviewed each video, frame by frame. His eyes narrowed in concentration. When the final clip ended, he switched off the screen and turned to me. "Evelyn," he said slowly, "this is enough to initiate phase 2. My heart thumped hard in my chest. I knew what that meant. Not retaliation, but preparation for the decisive blow, the one that would collapse their entire plan by their own actions. "From now on," Robert continued, "just do exactly what we discussed. Don't resist, don't avoid. Let them believe they're winning." I nodded softly. I was ready. Not because I wanted to harm my son, but because I couldn't allow him and Chloe to keep seeing me as easy prey. I was ready for the next stage, even knowing it wouldn't be gentle. But my hurt had already hardened into determination. I would see this through. The phone rang on a gloomy afternoon, the sky tinted with a muted gray that matched the swirl of emotions inside me. Mason's name lit up the screen. I let it ring a few extra seconds before answering, making my voice sound tired, slightly unfocused, exactly what they wanted to believe. "Mom, we need to talk," Mason began, his tone softer than usual. When people need something, they often become suspiciously gentle. "What is it, son?" I asked, letting my voice tremble just a little. "Mom, I think you should let me handle everything." Mason inhaled as if choosing words that sounded less like taking over and more like helping. "I mean full power of attorney, so I can take care of your finances, bills, banking, everything that might stress you out." I stayed silent for a few seconds. That silence, I knew, made him think I was wavering. And right on cue, Chloe slipped into the call, her voice sweet enough to feel sticky. "Evelyn, you've worked your whole life. Why keep struggling? Let Mason help. You just need to rest." I imagined the expression she must have, wide, concerned eyes and a practiced smile. But thanks to the camera footage, I already knew what her real expressions look like. "I think maybe we should talk in person," I said slowly. "Yes," Chloe replied immediately. "Lunch tomorrow. We'll pick you up." I ended with a line that nearly made me laugh because it sounded so perfectly fragile. "Maybe I should let you two help." The next day, the weather was sunny with a soft sea breeze. I wore a cream cardigan, simple, gentle, something that made me look like I was trying to care for myself despite being frail. Mason and Chloe arrived on time, wearing the triumphant smiles of people who believed victory was within reach. We went to a family restaurant. I ordered chicken soup. They ordered steak and pasta as if celebrating something. Throughout lunch, Mason looked at me like a dutiful son, except the devotion was bent into self-interest. He repeated concerns about my memory, my stress, my need for protection. Chloe played the anxious caregiver, touching my hand lightly, asking how I slept, whether I had strange headaches since the accident. They were good actors, but I was better. When Mason took a folder from his bag, I knew the pivotal moment had come. He set it on the table, pulling his chair closer. "Mom, this is the power of attorney. You just need to sign here and I'll handle everything so your life is easier." I opened the file and slowly turned the pages. Legal terms, small print, dense paragraphs. It was all meant to overwhelm. They assumed I wouldn't understand any of it. What they didn't know was that my attorney, Mr. Doyle, had already replaced the original documents with a harmless version, blank forms with no legal effect whatsoever. My signature meant nothing. I narrowed my eyes. It's hard to understand. Something, beneficiaries, trust, authority. "Let me explain," Mason said, eager but controlled. He pointed line by line, simplifying everything into comforting lies. I nodded, slow and uncertain looking. "You're at the signature page now, Mom," he said softly. I lifted the pen, letting my hand shake just slightly. I signed. When I finished the last stroke, I heard Chloe release a breath of pure, unguarded delight. "Evelyn, you won't have to worry about anything anymore," she said like a gentle breeze. "We'll handle it all." I smiled, a tired, grateful smile on the outside, but made of steel on the inside. On the way home, Mason said the line I had predicted almost exactly. "Tomorrow morning I'll go to the bank. The sooner the better." I nodded, touching my chest like an anxious old woman. "Yes. Thank you, son." But in my mind, everything was already laid out like a map. I had cameras installed. I had audio recorders set up. I had cloud backups ready. I had already informed my attorney. And Robert would follow Mason from the moment he left for the bank. At 68 years old, I was fully prepared to watch the trap close around two people who had treated me as nothing more than a resource. That night, I couldn't sleep, not out of fear, not anymore, but because of anticipation, sharp, cold, electric. I sat by the window listening to distant waves and the ticking clock counting down the final hours. My hands trembled slightly around my jasmine tea, not from weakness but from decades of motherly leniency finally giving way to resolve. Tomorrow, everything would be exposed. Tomorrow, they would learn I was no longer easily manipulated. Tomorrow, the trap they thought I had walked into would spring back onto them. I leaned back, closed my eyes. The reckoning was coming. The next morning, sunlight filtered through the curtains in thin, warm strips across the floor. I sat in the kitchen, holding a cup of hot tea, waiting for the inevitable. At exactly 8:12 a.m., my phone buzzed. Mason's name lit up. I let it ring 3 times before answering, making my voice sound groggy, half awake. "Mom," Mason panted as if he'd run across the city. Something's wrong." I blinked slowly. "What is it, son?" "I'm at the bank. They said your account has $600. His voice cracked. 600. I paused just long enough before replying in the gentlest, most ordinary tone. "Yes, that's all I have." A dry, hollow sound came through the phone, a gasp mixed with disbelief. Then Mason's voice jumped a pitch. "That's impossible. What about Dad's insurance, your savings, the old accounts, your retirement funds, the joint account with Aunt Margaret? Where's all of that?" "Son," I said softly, "I've never had much. You know that. I live on my pension and Social Security." "Mom, stop!" Mason's voice sharpened into a near shout. "Where is the real money?" I heard Chloe in the background, tense and frantic. "Ask her about the offline accounts. Ask about that trust from Aunt Margaret." I inhaled slowly. "I don't know what you mean." The silence that followed landed like a stone in deep water. Then Mason hung up without saying goodbye. Less than an hour later, I heard a car screech into my driveway. The door burst open so hard it hit the wall. Chloe stormed in first, lips pressed thin, face pale like she'd been robbed. Mason followed, still clutching the crumpled bank papers. "Mom," he said quickly, voice strung tight. "Explain. Now." I looked at them with the most innocent expression I could muster, a look that hid a heartbreak so old it barely stung anymore. I had imagined my son rushing into my home many times, but never like this. Not out of love, but out of panic over money he believed belonged to him. "Are you two all right?" I asked softly, which only made Chloe look ready to explode. "All right?" She barked out a laugh, sharp as glass. "You're telling us you only have $600. What about Aunt Margaret's estate?" "What estate?" I tilted my head, the perfect portrait of a confused older woman. "Don't play dumb." Chloe stepped closer. "We know she left you something. You mentioned she was wealthy. Real estate, investments, savings. Where is it?" I shrugged gently. "Aunt Margaret left me an old run-down house. Maybe you thought it was something more?" Mason stared at me as if I had slapped him. "No way. No way she only left a house." His voice trembled with disbelief. "She was rich. She did real estate. She had multiple accounts. She had to leave a large sum. You're lying." I shook my head, looking tired and a little sad. "Mason, I don't have anything big to hide." My son's face contorted. I could see the heartbreak, the anger, the panic all pulling at his features. Chloe grabbed his arm, but she too was shaking. "He cut back his work to prepare to take care of you," Chloe said, her voice rising with desperation. "We planned everything. You can't say you have nothing." "Planned? Everything?" I asked quietly. "For me?" Chloe's eyes darted away for a split second, but I saw all the shamelessness beneath it. Mason marched toward the kitchen table and slammed the bank papers down. Mom, Tom's grandmother lost her memory. His family hid her assets and then took over through guardianship. We can't help you if you won't tell us what you really have. Guardianship. I knew the word too well from the recordings Robert had shown me. I slowly sank into a chair. If I say I have no money, what were you planning to do? The room went still. Chloe, usually the quickest to speak, said nothing. She turned away, jaw clenched, eyes reddening, not from sadness, but from the realization that their entire plan had collapsed in their hands. Mason slammed his hand on the table, sending papers flying. Don't act like you don't know. You have money. You have to. No one gets old and only has $600. No one inherits property and ends up with a broken-down house. I shrugged like an old woman who truly didn't understand where this chaos was coming from. Mason, if I had money, I would have used it to help you long ago. Do you think I'd watch you struggle and do nothing? That made him take a step back. I knew it hit the place he didn't want to face, because somewhere deep inside, a part of him still believed I was the mother who sacrificed everything for him. The problem was, he didn't want a mother anymore. He only wanted his mother's money. Suddenly, Chloe snapped. What's that supposed to mean? You're saying we wasted months for nothing? That the guardianship plan is pointless? That we've just been helping someone who has nothing? I nodded slowly. If you two are trying to help me, then maybe yes. Chloe's face went pale. Mason looked like someone had drained the life out of him. He glanced around this tiny house, the old kitchen, the worn-out chairs, the walls that hadn't been painted in over 10 years. Everything in sight proved that whatever they believed about my secret assets or inheritance money had existed only in their imagination. But their panic wasn't because of the truth. It was because their own plan had just crumbled into dust. Chloe stepped closer to me. Evelyn, are you absolutely sure you don't have another account? An overseas account? An investment fund? Stocks? A backup credit card? An old joint account? I looked straight into her eyes, steady, calm, and said, No, I have nothing. What you see is all there is. Chloe stumbled back, her face twisting like someone kicked off a cliff she thought was solid ground. Mason dropped into a chair, holding his head. God, all that work, everything for nothing. What work? I asked softly, but enough to make veins rise on his neck. He didn't answer, but I had known the answer for a long time. In that moment, I understood. Their psychological collapse had only just begun. And the most terrifying thing for them wasn't the idea that I had no money. It was the realization that every tactic they'd prepared to take guardianship and grab what they believed I had was now meaningless to the point of being absurd. I sat still, hands around my teacup, letting the warmth press into my palms. They thought they had seen through me, but they didn't know. I was still holding the strongest card, $38 million they would never believe I was smart enough to hide. I knew things wouldn't end when Mason and Chloe left my house with ghost white faces. People who stake their entire future on imaginary wealth don't accept defeat easily. And just as I expected, not even 24 hours later, Mason called again. His voice wasn't angry like the day before. It had shifted into a strained, pleading tone. Mom, I've been thinking, maybe I rushed things when I had you sign that power of attorney. Maybe it's better if you just keep everything the same. Can you call the bank and cancel it? I tilted my head, smiling even though he couldn't see me. They must have stayed up all night talking, finally realizing that if I was truly poor, the power of attorney was useless, worse than useless. It made them look desperate. "Mason," I said, intentionally hesitant. I don't know. I already signed it. Maybe it's fine to leave it. You said it was to help me, remember?" No, Mason's voice jumped, losing control. "I mean, you don't need it anymore. I think you're healthy enough. Just cancel it, okay?" I let a few seconds pass, long enough for the panic on his end to deepen. "No, Mason. I'll leave it as it is. Less trouble." A long, defeated exhale came through the phone, and the call ended without even a goodbye. After that day, Mason and Chloe began showing up at my house more often, 3 times a week, then nearly every other day. No more fake smiles, no more forced warmth, only tension, frantic eyes, and increasingly invasive questions. "Are you sure you don't have another account? Think again. What bank? What old program? Which retirement fund? Did you hide cash somewhere in the house?" I kept playing my role, sometimes letting my hands tremble, sometimes repeating a question twice, sometimes looking straight at Mason and calling him by my ex-husband's name. Chloe always reacted the fastest. Every time I said something that sounded off, she flashed a tiny, victorious smile, the kind someone makes when they think evidence is piling in their favor. But she didn't dare accuse me of memory loss anymore. Saying it aloud would be admitting they'd been building that narrative for months. She had to swallow her impatience and pretend to be concerned. "Evelyn, are you sure you're okay? Tell me again, what day is it today?" I tilted my head. "Thursday." "Tuesday," Chloe corrected, her voice dripping with satisfaction. She didn't know the camera had captured her entire expression. All the files were copied to Robert, in case they ever tampered with my devices. One afternoon, Robert called. "They're borrowing high-interest money, Evelyn." I froze. "Borrowing? For what?" "They believe they're close to gaining control of your assets. When people think a large sum of money is coming, they take risks. According to my source, they've borrowed nearly $40,000 to pay off old debts and to place a deposit on a project Mason is involved in." I closed my eyes. It didn't make me happy, but it told me how desperate they were, and desperation would push them to recklessness. "How far do you think they'll go?" I asked. "Until they face consequences or get what they want," Robert replied bluntly. "All we need now is for them to say the one thing they shouldn't." And they would. I knew it. People cornered by their own greed always reveal themselves. In the following days, Mason and Chloe began arguing right in front of my house. Their voices carried across the yard, loud enough for neighbors to pause mid-stride. Chloe couldn't hold back anymore. "You swore she had money. You're the one who said Aunt Margaret was rich. You told me to pursue guardianship. Well, you did it, and that old woman is obviously hiding something." "Hiding what, when the account has only $600? A dog barked from the neighbor's yard after a burst of shouting. A couple walking by slowed down, shaking their heads. I opened the curtain just slightly, Mason gripping his hair, Chloe shoving him away, her eyes red with anger. The fight echoed across my driveway, each word ripping apart the polite facade they had worn for months. My outdoor camera captured every second. That night, they knocked on my door again, close to 9 p.m. I opened the door, truly exhausted this time, no acting needed. "Evelyn," Chloe said, voice trembling like she'd been crying, "you have to tell us the truth. Where are you keeping the money?" I shook my head gently. "I've told you everything." Mason pushed forward. "Mom, please, we're about to lose everything. Do you understand that? Lose the house, the car, the contracts. You can't let this happen. What's happening? I asked, my tone airy, as if genuinely confused. You know, Mason shouted, you're doing this on purpose. That sentence cut into me like an old rusted blade, but the pain no longer tore me apart. It settled like stone, sharp but no longer capable of breaking me. I answered slowly, Mason, I don't have money. Not a cent. Chloe let out a short, bitter laugh through tears. You think anyone believes that? You think you can fool us? You think we're stupid? I looked at them with no fear, no pleading, just the firm steadiness I had never needed until now. After they left, I closed the door. The house was so quiet I could hear the first drops of rain tapping on the roof. Near midnight, a faint sound outside woke me. I tapped the monitor connected to the cameras, and I saw them, Mason and Chloe, standing by my back door. Rain soaked their hair, their clothes, but they kept whispering. Chloe said, She knows, she's hiding it. We have to force it. No more options. I'm exhausted. Mason replied, sounding broken, but if she doesn't talk, we're finished. I hit record. The wind made the footage shake, but the voices were clear. Tomorrow, Chloe said, her voice stiff with anger. I'm asking her again, and this time she will tell us. She's not getting away from this. I stared at the screen, my hand still on the record button, surprisingly calm. I knew my life was about to turn a page. I knew the real confrontation was near, because now I was missing only one thing, a direct threat from their own mouths, and I could feel it was very, very close. I still remember the morning I decided to call the police, a rare Florida morning without strong wind, not too hot, and the birds on my roof sounded like they were urging me to act. For weeks, I had let Mason and Chloe show who they truly were. I had recorded every glance, every word, every breath, steeped in greed. But now I knew I couldn't face this alone. I dialed Detective Marissa Cole, the investigator Robert recommended, someone who specialized in elder abuse cases. Her voice was low, steady, and calm, like a person who had heard 1,000 cruel stories, yet managed to keep her compassion. You said you have evidence? She asked. I have plenty, I said, but I still need a clear threat, and I know it's coming. We'll help, but you need to be careful. I gave a small smile. I've been careful all my life. Now it's time to finish this. Within 2 hours, Detective Cole's unmarked car pulled into my driveway. She wasn't in uniform, just a blue blouse and khaki pants, looking more like a high school teacher than a police officer. 2 plainclothes investigators came with her. I let them inside and handed over all my recordings, videos, and written transcripts of every conversation. Detective Cole reviewed everything and nodded, her expression heavy, as if she felt some of my pain herself. You did the right thing, she said. All we need now is verbal evidence of a threat. 1 sentence is enough. I think it'll happen soon, I replied. We'll support you. She pulled a small device from her pocket, barely the size of 2 fingertips. This is a microphone. Light, clips inside your shirt. No one will notice. You just let the conversation unfold. I've done much harder things than this, I said, managing a faint smile. She placed a hand on my shoulder. You're braver than most people I've met. I didn't respond, just nodded. I had been preparing for this moment for weeks, and now it had arrived. That afternoon, I called Mason with a slightly weakened voice, as if I truly were overwhelmed. Can you come by? I'm feeling a bit lost. I knew that if I cracked the door open even a little, they would rush through. And just as expected, less than 10 minutes later, Mason's SUV screeched into my driveway. The door swung open hard enough to shake the front window. Chloe grabbed Mason's arm and stormed inside, not bothering to say hello. "Okay," Chloe snapped, her voice sharp and trembling. "Say whatever you were going to say so we know what to do next." I stepped back slightly, letting my hand tremble as I set the teapot on the table. The microphone, hidden beneath my third blouse button, picked up every breath. Mason leaned over the edge of the table, slightly lowering his face toward mine. There was no softness left in his eyes, not even a shred of the boy I raised. "Mom," he said through clenched teeth, "stop pretending." I widened my eyes. "Pretending about what, son?" "That money," he hissed. "Where are you keeping it? Do you want us to go bankrupt? Do you think we can survive like this? Huh?" I took another half step back as if overwhelmed. Mason stepped forward, voice rising. "Tell us where the money is. Stop acting dumb." I heard Chloe suck in a hard breath. Then she slammed her hand on the table so hard the teacup rattled. "We know you have money," she shouted. "Don't force us to use another way." For a moment, the room fell completely silent. I could hear the clock on the wall tick once. The microphone captured every word, each syllable like a blade. I raised my hand to my chest and stepped back, genuinely shaking, not out of fear of them, but because the weight of this moment was overwhelming after everything I had endured. "You two," I whispered, "are you threatening your mother?" Mason froze. Chloe did too. I watched their faces drain of color, as if all the blood had been pulled out at once. Mason blinked, stepping back slightly, but the panic in his eyes didn't retreat fast enough. "Mom, that's not what I meant. Chloe cut in, scrambling to fix the mistake. "What we mean is that you can't keep lying anymore." But it was too late, far too late. Both of them realized it in the exact same instant. Their words had crossed a line that could never be taken back. I set my hand on the table to steady myself. "If you came here to threaten me, then I think I should call—" "Don't!" Chloe shouted. "You are not calling anyone!" I looked at her the way one looks at a stranger. No, at the way one looks at who they truly are. The next morning, as I opened the window for the first sunlight, I heard police sirens approaching from afar. The sun was still low, the shadows of the trees stretching long across the walkway in front of the house. Then the sirens stopped. Car doors opened. Police boots stepped onto the concrete. I stood behind the curtain, watching Mason and Chloe get out of their car just as Detective Marissa Cole approached. "Mason Hart, Chloe Hart, you are under arrest on suspicion of elder financial abuse, attempted asset coercion, and threats against the victim." Chloe screamed, "No, this is a mistake. That never happened." Mason turned toward me, his eyes full of pain, anger, and desperation all mixed together. "Mom," he cried, "why did you do this? How could you betray me?" I stepped onto the front porch, keeping my voice as calm as possible. "I didn't betray anyone, Mason. I only protected myself." Detective Cole gave a signal. Officers handcuffed them and guided them into the patrol car. Chloe cried, and Mason stared at me as if his entire world had collapsed. There was no responsibility left in them, no affection, only bitterness at their failed plan. When the police car turned off the small road, the sirens gone, but their echo still lingering in my chest. I stood on the porch as a cool breeze brushed through my hair, not joyful, not triumphant, just the moment when a chapter finally closes, quietly, firmly, and necessarily. The first morning after Mason and Chloe were arrested, I woke feeling half my weight had been lifted, as if years of burden had finally been removed from my chest. But I knew the road ahead wasn't finished. People like Mason and Chloe rarely accept consequences easily. I had to take the next step, leaving the old house, once my home, now only a place carved with scars of pain. I moved out on the very day they were released, pending their first hearing. That afternoon, when the sun had just dipped, the doorbell of the old house rang loudly. Through the camera, I saw Mason and Chloe in the yard. Their faces were far more hollow than the day they were arrested. Chloe looked exhausted. Mason pulled taut like an overstretched wire. Mason banged on the door so hard I thought the wood would crack. Mom, are you in there?" No answer, no sign of life, not a single breath. After several desperate minutes of knocking, Chloe burst into tears. "She's gone, Mason, she really left." Mason pushed the door, finding the lock replaced, the curtains drawn up, the living room empty. No furniture, no personal belongings, no family pictures, no trace of life. No way, Mason muttered. Chloe gritted her teeth. She ran. She ran away from her responsibility. They didn't know I wasn't running away. I was simply walking away from them, a choice long overdue and absolutely necessary. More than 200 miles south, I stood in the living room of my new home, a small but elegant villa in Key Biscayne. Bright wood floors, crisp white walls, sunlight pouring through the large glass door and stretching across the floor like a soft golden ribbon. In the distance, the sound of waves, steady as breath. I had left a letter on the table of the old house before leaving. Robert sent me a photo of Mason opening it, his hands shaking so hard the paper wrinkled. The words were simple, but they were everything I needed to say. "Mason, I need a new life. One without violence, without schemes, without greed. When you are ready to face everything you've done, my attorney will speak to you. Not me. I wish you luck in finding yourself again. Evelyn." Chloe skimmed it and nearly screamed, "A new life! Your mother abandoned us." But no, they had abandoned me long before I left that house. A few days after, settling into Key Biscayne, I signed papers giving my attorney full authority over all communication with Mason and Chloe. From now on, they could only go through Mr. Doyle, never me. One soft blue afternoon, I signed the civil lawsuit filing, $600,000 against Mason and Chloe for emotional damage, threats, and attempted elder abuse. Robert stood beside me, leaning slightly. "You're sure?" I looked at the lawsuit, then out the window at the shimmering ocean. "I'm sure," I said. It's time they understood that consequences are real. Barely an hour after the lawsuit was submitted, Mason called. I hadn't planned to answer, but a part of me wondered how his voice would sound now. "Mom," he said, breathless, "I just got the notice. You filed a civil suit for $600,000. You don't have the money to sue, but you can't do that." I set my teacup down, my voice calm in a way that surprised even me. "But you do, Mason." Silence. Then I heard Chloe shouting in the background, ask why she sued." Mason returned to the line. "Mom, why are you doing this?" I inhaled softly. "Because I must protect myself, and because you need to understand that what you did cannot go unanswered. But you're my mother, and you are the one who threatened me to take money you had no right to." There was nothing more to say. He hung up. I didn't cry, didn't rage. I only felt light, as if, after months of suffocating weight, my heart finally settled back into its rightful place. Life in Key Biscayne came to me gently, like a soothing melody. The neighbors were kind. Marlene, a house away, often brought apple pie. Mr. Richard next door loved orchids and always asked if he could water mine. People walking along the beach at sunrise greeted one another with soft smiles. I began to feel like I belonged. In the mornings, I made coffee, opened the porch door, and watched the waves roll under the early sun. Seagulls flew low. Children laughed somewhere down the beach. The world was still beautiful. More beautiful now that there were no angry knocks on my door, no painful questions, no thick air heavy with ambition. One afternoon, Robert called. "Evelyn, I have news." "Good or bad?" "That depends on how you see it," he said, a faint bitterness in his tone. "Mason's construction company just lost 2 major contracts. One pulled out because of the scandal. The other canceled because suppliers won't work with someone under investigation for financial abuse." I paused. Not happy, not sad, just a hollow ache I didn't have a name for. "And Chloe?" "She was fired from her assistant sales director position. Clients complained she was unprofessional and connected to the ongoing case circulating in the community." Robert paused, then added, "Justice is slow sometimes, but it has its way." I sat on the rocking chair on my porch, watching the waves fall over themselves, layer after layer, like life itself, always carrying us away from what once hurt and towards something quieter, kinder. I wasn't happy that Mason and Chloe were struggling, but I understood that what they were facing was a lesson they had created for themselves. Finally, with the salty sea breeze around me, I whispered to myself, "Yes, justice comes slowly, but it comes at the right time." And I knew, for the first time in years, that the life ahead of me wouldn't be defined by fear or betrayal, but by freedom, calm, and a new life, exactly as I promised. I didn't go to court that morning hoping to watch anyone suffer. I just wanted to close a chapter torn so deeply it could no longer be repaired. Key Biscayne was nearly an hour's drive from the Miami-Dade courthouse, and the entire way there, I kept the window open so the ocean air could fill the car with the scent of freedom. When I stepped into the courtroom, I saw Mason and Chloe already seated. They sat beside their attorney, looking strangely small. No arrogance, no defiance. Only 2 people standing on the edge of a cliff, carved by their own greed. The judge read the sentence slowly, each word dropping into the courtroom like a stone. Mason Hart and Chloe Hart are sentenced to 18 months of probation, along with 250 hours of community service. The court acknowledges evidence of threats, intent to coerce assets, and emotional abuse toward an elderly victim. Chloe covered her face. Mason didn't cry, but his eyes were sunken and red, like someone who had lost his entire world. Then the judge concluded, "Mrs. Evelyn Hart suffered significant emotional harm. She is entitled to compensation. The court accepts the civil settlement negotiated by both parties, $400,000. I didn't look at them, didn't gloat, didn't feel anger anymore, just a long, tired sadness that felt like an old, deep crack. 2 weeks after the hearing, I received an unexpected call from an unfamiliar number. I almost didn't pick up, but something inside nudged me to. "Mrs. Evelyn, is that you?" A young girl's voice trembling. "Yes, it's me. Who is this?" "This is Lily, and my mom is Chloe." I stopped breathing for a second. Lily, the 12-year-old who was always quiet when I babysat her, whose eyes darted nervously whenever Mason and her mother argued. A child who had never done anything wrong. "Lily, honey, is something wrong?" Her voice shook harder. Did my parents try to hurt you?" I heard them fighting. I heard them say really bad things. I closed my eyes. No elderly person should ever hear that question from a child, and no child should ever bear the shame of their parents' actions. No, sweetheart, I said softly. They didn't hurt me, and I'm safe. But why did they do it? You don't even have money. That question tightened something deep in my chest. I had prepared to lie for the rest of my life, but to this voice, this innocence that deserved the truth, I couldn't. I shouldn't. Lily, I said, taking a breath, the truth is, I do have money. More than you think. She fell silent for a few seconds. You have money? I told her, slowly, carefully, gently, about Aunt Margaret, the $38 million, why I hid it, and how Mason and Chloe had changed once their suspicions turned into obsession. I didn't tell anyone, I ended, because I was afraid of losing my son, and afraid that greed could hurt not only me, but innocent people around us. Lily let out a shaky sigh. I didn't know my mom was like that. I softened my voice without a trace of blame. You are not responsible for the actions of adults. Do you understand? None of this is your fault. A long silence passed before Lily whispered, Are you mad at me? I let out a small laugh, my heart warming just a little. Never. I care about you very much. But you won't give my parents money, right? Lily asked, as if she were afraid she might lose some fragile hope for her family. No, I answered truthfully. I will not support them, because that wouldn't be good for anyone. I heard the girl swallow. But you, I continued, you did nothing wrong. You still have your whole future ahead of you. And if you want, I can help you with college someday. On the other end came a small, choked sob. Mrs. Evelyn, really? Really? Really, sweetheart. Then suddenly Lily said, Can I hug you? The question was so beautiful, it felt like it lit up the whole room around me. 2 days later, Lily and her aunt came to Key Biscayne. As soon as she stepped out of the car, the girl ran to me and hugged me tightly, not out of guilt or pity, but out of something new growing between us, clean, gentle, and free of any agenda. For the first time in many years, I felt that I had not lost everything. Not everything withers. Not every relationship is meant to die. Some new bonds are soft, steady, and beautiful, if we are brave enough to open our hearts. That afternoon, as Lily sat on the front porch, her legs swinging to the rhythm of the ocean breeze, I looked at her, and then at the bright blue horizon. The universe has a strange way of compensating us. It doesn't return what we lost. It gives us what we need. I lost Mason, but I found Lily. A different generation, a different heart, a different chance to love the right way. And I realized that sometimes new beginnings don't come from the people we once called family. They come from the people who choose to become family to us. I never thought that at 68 I would begin a new journey, not one to raise someone, not to endure someone, but to live for myself. But sometimes life pushes us to the very edge of pain so that we can finally see the path back to peace. After the trial, after the sleepless nights, after the tears shed for things I could not keep, I sat on my porch, watching the sea shift into a silvery blue, and I asked myself, what will I do with the rest of my life? The answer came as gently as the waves. I want people like me, older adults financially abused, pushed into despair by their own family, to have somewhere to hold on to. And that's how the Heart Foundation was born. I remember the morning we launched it. The sky was so clear it looked deliberately painted. There was no big ceremony, no reporters, no champagne or applause. Just me, Robert, and 3 new neighbors, people who had heard my story and said they wanted to help. I looked at the sign, Heart Foundation, the letters painted ocean blue, and I felt like I was laying the first brick for people who had never had a voice. I'm not creating this foundation for gratitude, I told them. I'm doing it because I know what it feels like to have your own child treat you like a payout. I don't want any mother or father standing alone in the dark ever again. Robert nodded, his eyes filled with a pride I had never seen from Mason. Evelyn, he said, this is something you should have done long ago. You're making a bigger impact than you realize. I smiled, and the sea breeze lifted my hair like a soft stroke from life itself, reminding me that it's never too late to begin again. The months that followed drifted by in a peace I once believed I would never touch again. No more heavy late-night phone calls, no more threats or schemes, no more feeling like a burden. In the mornings, I walked along the beach, letting the soft sand slip between my toes. At noon, I read under the shade of palm trees, listening to children playing by the neighborhood pool. In the afternoons, I made chamomile tea and let the last sunlight kiss my hands. People say old age is when life starts fading, but for me, old age is when I started truly living. One day, as I was watering the lavender bushes by my porch, the building manager brought me an envelope. "For you, Mrs. Hart," he said, sounding slightly hesitant. I recognized the handwriting immediately, Mason's handwriting. I stood still for a moment before opening it. "Mom, I don't expect you to forgive me, but I want you to know I'm sorry. I let greed take me too far. I lost you, and I understand that's the right price to pay. I hope you are at peace. Mason." I read every line, then folded the letter and placed it in the wooden box beside my bed. I didn't cry. I wasn't happy or hurt. I just felt a soft emptiness, like a gentle breeze drifting through an open room. I forgave Mason, but I will never return to the life I had. Forgiveness doesn't mean letting someone back in. I was grateful he found clarity, but I was even more grateful that I found the courage to move on. And then there were the special days when Lily came to visit. She ran through the gate, hugged me tightly, then jumped straight into the pool, laughing like wind chimes. Some afternoons we sat on the porch together, Lily with her vanilla ice cream and me with my strawberry, both of us watching the sea turn pink and orange at sunset. "Mrs. Evelyn," Lily said once, "it's so peaceful here. I love coming here." I patted her head and smiled. "Me too, sweetheart. When you're here, my home feels brighter." Lily didn't know it, but each time she hugged me, I felt my heart grow young again. The wrinkles didn't vanish, but the way I saw the world softened and warmed, and I understood. Blood doesn't make a family. Hearts do. Sometimes, on evenings when the wind is still, I sit on my porch and look at the water stretched out like a giant mirror. I think about the journey behind me, full of wounds, lies, betrayal, but also full of moments when I stood up, fought back, and refused to be extinguished. And I realized this: I didn't lose. I just finally found freedom. And freedom isn't loud. It's the sound of the ocean. It's a warm cup of tea. It's a morning with no one pounding on my door. It's the moment I no longer fear anyone. It's loving without worrying about being used. It's devoting the rest of my life to myself, to the people who deserve it, to Lily, to the elders who need the protection of the Heart Foundation. Freedom is the most beautiful victory of my life. And if you're reading this story all the way to now, I want to tell you something I often remind myself. We are never too old to start again, to choose something better, to walk away from what hurts us. Maybe you've been hurt too. Maybe you've been betrayed by family. Maybe you felt like you reached the end of the road. But if I could do it, you can too. I close this story on a breezy ocean afternoon, deeply grateful that I found the courage to rise. And I am grateful for you, for listening, for walking with me through this journey. Thank you for staying with me until the very last word. Which city are you watching from? Have you ever witnessed elder abuse in your family or neighborhood? Share your thoughts below. I treasure every story you leave. And if this story touched you, please like, subscribe, and stay tuned for the next one. Thank you for being here, truly.